Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is kind of an impromptu stream, but this thing is getting fiery. Like it is insane. They have yelled at each other. It is nuts. This is the um, Hunter Biden contempt hearing. They're trying to hold him in contempt for defying the subpoena, and it has gotten nasty. So we're gonna pick it up here. I'll probably play the whole thing at a different time, but it was just too
Well,
great to
that
not
strikes me
share
as
with
odd.
everybody.
That does look like
I'm just gonna
the
let it
famed
play.
cherry picking. It's as if to say, well, two of these interviews helped us. 15 or 16 of them don't help us, so we're going to bury them someplace. So that's odd. But I want to presume the best of my colleagues, Mr. Higgins, and that's why I'm asking the chairman to explain what is the practice here.
Well, you complain that we don't release transcripts. You complain because we do release transcripts. Honestly, we released those two transcripts because you had misrepresented so much what Devin Archer said. That's probably one reason he went on Tucker Carlson's show to call you out for misrepresenting what he said in the transcribed interview.
But so you are able to get them ready. You are able to get them ready, in other words, and you thought that it was
we have other witnesses
important.
to interview. You know how it works, Mr. Raskins. You know you're playing like
I can
you
get
don't
super
know
chats
how
again.
this
Thanks,
works.
buddy. I appreciate it.
And trying to
7
act
months,
like
stingy.
you've never done an
You can get
investigation
super
before.
chats
When you
again.
led,
Yeah, I
both
finally got
impeachments
them.
in the January 6th.
Anyways, for
the
those
first
joining us,
impeachment.
this is the hearing. It is nasty. It has been
admit
intense.
to leading
It's
that
been
first
awesome to watch.
either.
And I
I would have
got a
10
chance to
nicknames
throw
from
it up.
President Trump by now if I got that one.
I'll throw the whole
You got
6 or 7
I
hours up
think
probably
your all's
tomorrow.
time is
Maybe we'll
pretty
do
much
it. But
expired.
it was just
Does
too
anyone on our
insane to not
side
do it.
have
So
anything to add? I don't see anything. So who's that? Mr. Gosar.
Yeah, we talk about facts. It wasn't U.S. policy to do what Biden did in Ukraine. The Obama administration actually said that Ukraine had complied with the law and that the loan should go through. Yes, they did, and that the vice president changed it on an audible over there. So the other thing I want to point out is if the president didn't know anything about Hunter Biden's businesses, how do you explain the 14, 15, 16, I can't remember now how many times his partner actually went to the White House? How do you explain that? How do you explain this guy, Devin Archer, shows up at the White House? Who are you? Normally the person's going to say, well, I'm Hunter Biden's business partner. That's typically what the average person would say. So how come you didn't know anything about that?
Mr. Gosar, for the 6 people in America who are still watching our hearing, could you just explicate what you think the presidential crime is?
Oh, I'm just saying right now, we're just talking about the facts. The facts here are misplayed. I mean, you complain about us, I'm going to complain about you because
Would the
you're
gentleman
distorting
yield
the facts.
for 1 second?
I'll give you a second.
Mr. Gosar's time.
Just, I'm not going to ask you to take my representation for it. I would ask you to go read the transcripts of the State Department witnesses in the first impeachment who were in the Ukraine embassy and in the State Department and were the ones who created and made the official U.S. policy, who all testified that Vice President Biden was acting consistent with official U.S. policy.
Okay, well, that's not what we received. And when you start looking at this, the courts, I know the ranking member always goes to the courts. You had a judge that basically said this honeypot of a deal for Hunter was no good. No one was going to get that. How do you explain the slow walking, by the Justice Department on the IRS claims? And how many people get a chance to do that?
Well, with the gentleman yield, that's a great point. And when the courts ruled against Hunter Biden, I don't think you heard a single complaint from anybody on our side of the aisle. We said, let the justice system proceed. But when the court said that the January 6th committee was validly and constitutionally composed, we still have people today who violated their subpoenas who are whining about how the committee is illegal. I mean, come on. I mean, how do you feel about that one?
Could I ask you a question about that?
Yes.
Just out of curiosity, why did you all not hold them in contempt?
Hold who in contempt?
The people that didn't.
Oh, we didn't have time at that point. I mean, we got up to the very end of the Congress.
I was just wondering.
But if you want to work on it now, let's do it. I'm totally with you, Mr. Chairman.
No. I was just curious as to why you didn't. All right.
Well, let's make it bipartisan.
I'd like
Everybody good?
that
We're
we
square.
hold anyone who's violated
No, I was just wondering. I mean, that's a tool that Congress has. If you've been on TV several times saying that people should honor congressional subpoenas.
And I
And when they
believe
don't,
it,
you hold them in contempt.
whether it's Steve Bannon, Dan Scavino, Jim Jordan, or Hunter Biden, if somebody is,
But you did hold
if
the
somebody-
other two.
I'm sorry?
You did hold those two of those in contempt of
We
court.
did. Well, Steve Bannon's been convicted by a jury,
Well,
by a court. He's been
the
convicted
Department
in
of
court.
Justice
And
went
still,
after
I
him.
don't think we
Yeah.
could get a single person on your side of the aisle other than Ms. Mace to utter a word about people who violated subpoenas in the last Congress. I mean, that's extraordinary. And but all that I've been saying about Hunter Biden is he accepted what was your original offer. You didn't like that offer anymore. You put out
No,
a
we
different-
will, let me say this, and then your time's expired,
Yeah.
and we're gonna get to the vote. Hunter Biden is more than welcome to come for a hearing after the deposition.
Okay, you didn't say that
Will
before, but
you-
that's cool. You've changed the
Mr.
offer.
Chairman, hold on. Will you
No, the
guarantee
time is
that there
expired,
will
Mr.
be a
Goldman.
public
You have
hearing?
talked and talked.
Will you
and talked.
guarantee that there will be a public hearing if he were to come in?
After the deposition, I
You
guarantee.
say right now, you
Yes.
will have a public hearing
Yes.
with Hunter Biden.
Absolutely, we've said that. All right.
Yeah, I know. We heard a lot about public
Okay,
hearings that have
very
not
good.
happened.
The question on the amendment, I don't even remember who offered the amendment. Miss Crockett. The question is on the Crockett amendment. All those in favor of the Crockett amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Recorded vote on that, please.
A recorded vote is ordered as previously announced. Further proceedings on the question will be postponed. Pursuant to the previous order, the chair declares the committee in recess subject to the call of the chair. We will plan to reconvene in 15 minutes to get everyone together. The committee stands in recess.
All right, so they're back to recess. Hey, what's up, KLI? This hearing has been nuts. It has been all day. So what they're doing is they're holding Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress, because he's been total shitbag about it. Let's be honest. And of course it's Trump. Yes, we are live, Stingy. They're still having the hearing. So I was trying to see real quick if we could get some maybe lowlights. I mean, they were actually screaming at each other where the parliamentarian had to come in and stop them screaming at each other. Like, it's been fucking crazy. It's worth the watch. Like I said, it's been all day. I'll definitely share the whole footage. It's been insane. So contempt hearing. Ms. Jaipold earlier said something about an erection. I mean, it's been nuts. So the first one was 5 hours, a little bit over 5 hours. Actually, let's look at does anybody have that Marjorie Taylor Greene? That could send it to me. Maybe this is it. There it is. I got it. Never mind, guys. Sorry about that. I was in no way ready to stream. I just got home and I was like, oh shit, this is too good to this is too good to pass up. So this is Marjorie Taylor Greene. She questioned Hunter Biden's in the back, basically mocking the committee. All reports say he's been a real ass. So he's been in the back of the committee just mocking the entire committee. So Marjorie Taylor Greene addressed him directly, and this is it.
Excuse me, Hunter. Apparently, you're afraid of my words. Whoa! Oh.
I like to
That kinda
reclaim
was-
my time, Mr. Chairman.
burst their bubble. Wow, that's too bad.
Mhm. I think it's clear and obvious for everyone watching this hearing today that Hunter Biden is terrified of strong conservative Republican women because he can't even face my words as I was about to speak to him. What a coward. And this is also a coward that sat right here in front of Mickey Babbitt, Ashley Babbitt's mother, who was murdered on January 6th by Michael Byrd, the Capitol Police officer. And you want to talk about a committee, a political sham? I'll totally disagree with you, Ms. Mace. That January 6th committee was not bipartisan. It was a complete setup to go after President Trump, go after Republicans, go after anyone that believes in free and fair elections, people that believe the Department of Justice
Did you just send it
should
to
be
me?
fair and balanced, not a
What's up, Bobby?
political weaponized department of the federal government that is targeting President Trump, his supporters,
Well, the
people that
last one I
walked in
see
the
is
Capitol
the
on January
Chapel
6th,
one.
and now
Stench.
people that stood outside the Capitol. There's been no justice for Ashley Babbitt's family. Michael Byrd has never been charged with anything. He was let off and he was given a promotion and allowed to walk free. And Hunter Biden just walked out. That is an example of not following the law. Hunter Biden thinks he's above the law. Don Jr., Eric Trump, Ivanka, Trump family members had to come in to Democrat subpoenas and be questioned by Democrats for over 8 hours, each of them. Hunter Biden runs away. Hunter Biden did not come when we subpoenaed him. He did not follow the law. And then one of our colleagues helped him evade his subpoena by going and reserving a press conference for him on his behalf, helped him evade the subpoena, helped Hunter Biden break
For those
the
just joining
law.
us, we
Let's
are
talk
going to
about
join
his
it
own
live when it
father's
returns.
words.
They're in a
President
15-minute
Joe Biden
recess.
said
current.
in October 2021 that individuals who defy subpoenas from the January 6th House Select Committee should be prosecuted. And the Justice Department indicted Steve Bannon for doing so in November 2021. Hunter Biden's father, the President of the United States, said that he should be prosecuted. Anyone that defies a subpoena should be prosecuted. Hunter Biden didn't show up for his subpoena. Hunter Biden showed up today to make a clown show of himself, to show that he is nothing but someone that will not obey the law, that wants to show up when he wants to, and sits here with a smug look on his face and runs away when it's my turn to talk. Not only is he a criminal, but he is a coward. Nothing but a coward. Let's
I
talk
agree with
about
that.
voting for things. We have members on this committee that are on record on their own Twitter accounts talking about people blowing off subpoenas
Yeah, I
on the
got that one.
January 6th committee that states
Thanks,
the
Gigi.
rule of law is stirring all over America. That's Representative Jamie Raskin right here. I'll enter this for the record. Representative Jamie Raskin. Steve Bannon has been convicted of acting in contempt of Congress.
What's up,
My
Bill?
argument with Rep
Yeah,
Gates is
very
now
angry.
settled. If
Very, very
subpoenaed,
angry.
you show up and assert any privilege you think applies to specific questions, but you can't blow off the proceeding. He blew it off. Walking in today is too late. We have to hold Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress because he's not above.
Okay, we heard enough from Marjorie Taylor Greene. So this is a epitome of white privilege. This is the faux Republican.
My first question is who bribed Hunter Biden?
Marjorie
to be
Taylor
here
Greene,
today? That's
Congressman,
my first question.
Very pro-Trump.
Second question, you are the epitome of white privilege, coming into the Oversight Committee, spitting in our face, ignoring a congressional subpoena to be deposed. What are you afraid of? You have no balls to come up here and,
Mr. Chairman, point of inquiry.
Mr. Chairman,
If
The ladies
if
recognize.
I'm not
the
done.
gentle lady
Play
wants to hear from Hunter
stupid
Biden, we can hear from him right now, Mr.
and
Chairman. Let's
win
take a
stupid
vote and
prizes.
hear from
I'm
Hunter Biden.
speaking.
What are you
women
afraid
allowed
of?
to speak
Hold
in
on,
here?
hold on.
Why-
Order,
why are you
order,
guys not
order.
willing to let
Are
us
Space,
women allowed to
space.
speak in
All
here
right.
or no?
Active
Are women allowed to
Congress.
speak in
They
here?
are
Order.
You keep
losing their
interrupting me.
shit. This is Byron Donalds, and it goes to 17 other people. Like this is the most insane I've ever heard a congressional hearing ever in my entire life. I need to stop listening to myself. Actually, we'll go over to he gave an interview to Fox News.
Would you please, I'll answer your question if you be quiet and let me make a statement, okay? What kind of crack do you normally smoke, Mr. Biden? Would you please, I'll answer your question if you be quiet and let me make a statement, okay?
And then example one will not load for whatever fucking reason. So we go back to Byron Donalds, and that should hopefully take us to he gets back to live.
I'd like to just add a couple of points to what you've said. On January 6th, Senator Ted
Oh, I know
Cruz
what's going to happen.
described
I've
it
never
as
disputed that
terrorism.
it's going to
They
happen.
later came to attack him during their
I think we're in it.
revisionist, Orwellian, Stalinist attempt to rewrite history.
Whoa.
Unfortunately for them, we know that there were 147 or 48 of our officers who were wounded, bloodied, and hospitalized by the rabid mob that beset the Capitol that day. We know that Kevin McCarthy, one of their deposed leaders over on their side, called Donald Trump from his office to complain about how his people were storming the Capitol and putting people's lives in danger. And Donald Trump said, no, those aren't my people. Those are Antifa. And McCarthy corrected him and said, no, those are your people, Mr. President. To which Donald Trump said, well, maybe they just care a little bit more about who won the election than you did, Kevin McCarthy. You guys have got to deal with reality here. By the way, the speech and debate clause stands for the exact opposite principle who our distinguished new member just spoke about a moment ago. It says that members of Congress
Mr.
cannot
Chairman,
be questioned
Mr.
anywhere
Chairman.
else other than Congress. So
Point of
he should read
privilege.
the speech or debate
Mr.
clause
Chairman.
aloud.
Let him finish his sentence there. Now, Chair recognizes Mr. Burchett from
Mr.
Tennessee
Chairman.
for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My colleagues seem to want to talk about the justice system, so let's talk about it.
I like
November of
this
last
guy,
year, the
Dab
chairman
Gommit.
issued a subpoena to Hunter
Dab
Biden to appear on December 13th, for a closed-door deposition. Instead of respecting the rule of law, Hunter Biden chose to give a press conference on the front steps of the Senate. To show such contempt for Congress without fear of repercussions highlights a theme throughout this administration and Democrat administrations before it. If you're a big-name Democrat, then you are immune to prosecution. Former Attorney General Eric Holder said as much in a memo he wrote regarding collateral consequences. For those that don't know, the collateral consequence policy allowed prosecutors to consider whether charging a company or individual will result in greater societal harm than not charging them. It's why the banks weren't held criminally accountable to the fallout of the 2008 financial crisis. It is why Jeffrey Epstein's clients aren't behind bars. It's also the mindset of President Biden and his family. Too big to jail. Not too big to fail, too big to jail. The two-tier justice system is a disgrace to our country and the principles it was founded on. I thank the chairman and the committee for the hard work they put in to hold the Biden administration accountable, but I doubt our Justice Department has the guts or the wherewithal to do anything about it. And I would like to yield my time to my friend from Florida, Byron Donalds.
Actually,
I'll yield.
yield
Let me yield to Miss May. She hasn't gotten enough quality TV time
no.
today, so I'll give her a little more time.
Thank you. And then I'll yield to my colleague from Florida as well. I'm going to try to be quick here because I was accused by my colleague on the other side of the aisle about my white privilege. I want to say, number one, as the former ranking member of the Civil Rights Subcommittee under Chairman Raskin last session, I take great pride as a white female Republican to address the inadequacies in our country. I come from a district where rich and poor is literally black and white, black versus white on most days. My largest jail in my district, which is the largest jail in the state of South Carolina.
Hang on, I just found something. Oh my God, Babylon B strikes again. Great job, guys. Mitch McConnell dresses as a prostitute to lure Hunter into congressional hearing. That is both a terrifying thought and probably true. There you go. There it is. Do you mean he dropped? Like, I hope he didn't drop very far, because then there'll be millions dead from an earthquake. I hope he just decided to leave and didn't actually drop. Fucking love the Bee. They're so good. Looks like they're starting to funnel back in, so we'll go back to this previous hearing.
has had 7 or 8 deaths in the last 2 years. And I
It
was
could be.
there with our
Very well
Black
could
and
be.
African American council members trying to get the right thing done. And I come from a district where Black men have been killed by law enforcement, tased to death in our jails. And I've stood with
I'm
those Black
100%
families
just
because I
searching
know
Twitter
the
for shit
differences
because I had
that
no
they
intention
see
of
day to
streaming.
day in
Like I
their life.
said,
And I
this was
try
just
to
too
do the
damn
best
good.
that I can. I come from a district where the first African American, first
Oh my
Black
God.
man in the U.S. House of Representatives was
Sorry, one more. Chris Christie suspends campaign to spend more time with family-sized 12-piece chicken meal from KFC. Oh, no. Oh, no. Oh, I needed that. Thank you, B.
Joseph P.
Holy
Rainey
shit.
represented my district back in the 1800s with that. The last Black member of the U.S. House of Representatives before Reconstruction came from South Carolina, George P. Murray, the Black man, former slave, an entrepreneur who founded the Republican Party in South Carolina. One of the founding members was named Robert Smalls, who commandeered a
Biggie
Confederate
Smalls?
ship and gave it to Union soldiers and served his country admirably in the process. In my district, it was Harriet Tubman. You can see it in the movie Harriet, who rescued more than 700 slaves in one night in Beaufort County, South Carolina. So I am very well aware of our rich history and try to recognize it as best as I can in the position that I have. And I resent the fact that you're going to throw that in my face up here. I'm one of the few people that you'll see on my side of the aisle trying to do the right thing for the right people every single day. And I would like to yield the remaining balance of time to my colleague from Florida.
This has been a very interesting hearing. Mr. Waltz, welcome to Oversight. Yes, it usually gets like this. Look, let's be very clear. This isn't about Hunter Biden's white privilege. It's about Hunter Biden's Democrat privilege. Because Donald Trump Jr. showed up for 5 congressional subpoenas. There was never this circus where he was subpoenaed by House Democrats and he showed up on the Senate side or showed up at the White House to answer in some fake, phony, lame press conference, not actually going to the House and doing what he was compelled by a subpoena to do. Hunter Biden did that. And
I
then
like
he
this
has
guy,
the
just for the
unmitigated
record.
gall to show up here when we know that we're going through
I saw
actually
that, Jason. That's
the
cool.
legislation for
The message you
contempt,
sent
which,
me.
by the way, Mr. Chairman, we should actually get to the legislation of contempt. The speechifying is great, but let's do our business, members. He has the gall to come here, show up, and then when the Democrats are saying, hey, he wants to speak, he leaves. This is a joke. This is a farce. The man has been subpoenaed by Congress. Oh, and by the way, the January 6th committee, Mr. Raskin, which you did sit on, by the way, that was not a normally ordered committee of Congress because Nancy Pelosi did not want the Republican members that then Leader McCarthy put up.
According to the courts, it was.
My time, sir.
Will you yield for
No, I will
a
not.
correction?
I was respectful of your time. I didn't say anything. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's move forward with our business. He should be held in contempt. There was a subpoena. He did not answer it. Any other American will be held in contempt by Congress. Any other. This is Democrat privilege of the highest order. Let's do our jobs. I yield.
Gentleman yields. Chair now recognizes Ms. Ocasio-Cortez from New York.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to address briefly,
Oh, shit, not her.
quickly that moment about privilege and all of this that we're seeing here. It was a very beautiful speech by the gentlelady who, as she mentioned,
Hell
was
yeah.
helped lead on the now
100%.
majority side
What's up,
Civil
Josh
Rights
Chandler?
and Civil Liberties Subcommittee. But I think it's so exemplary of the point that she also oversaw the elimination of the Civil Rights
There's been some
Subcommittee
grumblings.
on
It's a
this committee,
possibility.
which really kind of gives the whole game away. We show up, we give speeches, we give flowery words, but at the end of the day, participate in the structural erosion of the rights and representation of people that are
Okay. I want to answer Jason's questions real quick. We're talking about Starlink. They sent the first successful test messages with the recent batch of satellites they sent up to have cell capability. Yes, I think that when you see more and more censorship from companies, like we're seeing new terms of service come out that are explicit in the fact that they're going to censor speech, I think that Elon may go in that direction as well. I think he is a true believer of free speech. I don't know that he's conservative. I don't think he's conservative, but he is a true fighter for free speech, and I do believe that. So, but yeah, we'll get back to this. I just wanted to address that.
Marginalized women, people of color, people
Oh,
that
yeah.
just need to see their due process and civil liberties protected in this country. But I will move on. As also the Republican side had mentioned in their many raisings of the January 6th committee, that it's not just Hunter Biden, you, me, any individual subject
100%.
to equal treatment under the law, to be held up to accountability under the law, but it is also these committees and this committee that is subject to oversight and law. We must comply with the law here as well. Now, I may be one of the very few people that actually believes in Congress, you know, in this country, but I do.
True.
And many of us do here. And we have an obligation to engage in good faith participation to execute and comply with a subpoena. The chairman said in front of the country several times to Hunter Biden, you can show up here in front of the world, in front of the public. Hunter Biden took him up on that offer. He said, I will show up in public. I will show up in public. He showed up here today. He showed up here in the past. And Mr. Chairman, I know you do your best with what you've got, but you've got members here that have submitted falsified evidence to the record. You have members here that have submitted and mischaracterized closed door hearings, and people want to say back and forth at the end of the day. It doesn't matter what party it's happened from. You've got members who've engaged in revenge porn in this committee. So it is understandable why Hunter Biden would want to testify in front of the public for the American people to be able to witness that testimony for themselves. You've got members who've defied subpoenas. You've got members who we are 1 year into the term asking what the rules are at the beginning of the committee. The book was given to us on day one. And so what we should do is allow the man to testify. I believe in the power of the Oversight Committee. Frankly, I believe in it regardless of whether Republicans or Democrats have the chair, because I believe that this committee should have the power of oversight. And we cannot do that on a partisan basis. And so for that, I implore this committee to allow Hunter Biden to testify publicly. I implore and I ask for that to happen. And we cannot do that by getting engaged in this back and forth on a defiance of the subpoena. Let him comply. Let him do it today. Let him do it tomorrow. But let the man do it. And with that, I yield back to the ranking member.
Thank you, Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. I think you went right to the heart of the issue here. You know, if this ended up going to court, Mr. Chairman, and I hope it doesn't, I really hope that this committee will act in a way to negotiate and achieve a compromise with the witness. But if it goes to the court, it's going to present a novel question. What happens when a committee represented by its distinguished chairman goes out in public and repeatedly invites and challenges a witness to come before the committee, and then that witness gives the answer, yes, I will come in? At that point, the committee pulls a bait and switch and says, well, we actually don't want you to come before the full committee as was offered repeatedly in public by the chairman, but instead, we'd like you to come to a back room and do it there in a closed deposition. Now, undoubtedly, if that had been the original offer, the committee would stand in a very good place, the way we did with Mr. Biggs and Mr. Perry and Mr. Jordan, because they were told to come in, they were subpoenaed, and they blew off the subpoenas of the committee, which is why I don't think anybody should be voting on that side other than Ms. Mace, because Ms. Mace is the one who took the position that the rule of law means something. And I take the position, if we give somebody a subpoena, they should come in. But there's a very sticky problem now. What happens when we give them one offer A and then switch it over to offer B? That's why I hope you will work it out, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for yielding.
Gentlelady's time's expired. To respond to the gentlelady, he can come in for a hearing after the deposition.
After the deposition. You can come in, but you can do our shit first. So we're still waiting on the hearing to get back, of course. I think this clip's going to work finally.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Where's he
Excuse
going?
me, Hunter. Apparently, you're afraid of my words.
Whoa.
Oh, shit, that's the wrong clip. We saw that one already.
Oh.
I'd like to
that kinda
reclaim
was-
my time, Mr. Chairman.
Kind of burst their bubble. Wow, that's too bad.
For 5 minutes.
Let me look for that. Why we're doing that? I'll let this loop because I think it's okay. Here's the original clip that I was looking for.
My friend across the aisle and the outrage. I think we're all outraged about many things, but if we're going to talk about outrageous things that have happened or things that have never happened, let's talk about the fact that President Trump incited an erection, and maybe that too.
Yeah, you could talk about that too, I guess.
Maybe we should talk about that too. The president incited an insurrection. My friend across the aisle and the
It's
outrage.
worth listening to
We're
again.
all outraged about many things, but if we're going to talk about outrageous things that have happened or things that have never happened, let's talk about the fact that President Trump incited an erection, and maybe that too.
Yeah, you could talk about that too, I guess.
Maybe we should talk about that too. The president incited an insurrection. My friend across the aisle and the outrage. I think we're
Okay, so we are still waiting on hearing to come back. I guess we can watch this one. Here's oh, hang on.
In the nature of a substitute.
There we go. We're back just in
Question is
time.
now on the previously postponed amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute offered by Mr. Goldman from New York. The clerk will call the roll on the Goldman amendment.
Mr. Jordan, Mr. Turner, Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes no. Ms. Fox.
This is apparently the vote.
Mr. Grothman. Mr. Grothman votes no. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes no. Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes no. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes no. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes no. Ms. Mace. Ms. Mace votes no. Mr. LaTurner. Mr. LaTurner votes no. Mr. Fallon. Mr. Donalds. Mr. Donalds votes no. Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry votes no. Mr. Timmons. Mr. Timmons votes no. Mr. Burchett. Mr. Burchett votes no. Ms. Green. Ms. Green votes no. Ms. McLean. Ms. McLean votes no. Ms. Boebert. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry votes no. Ms. Luna. Ms. Luna votes no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Burleson. Mr. Burleson votes no. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Waltz votes no. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Norton.
Yes.
Ms. Norton votes yes. Mr. Lynch. Mr. Lynch votes aye. Mr. Connolly. Mr. Krishnamurthy.
Aye.
Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Khanna.
Aye.
Mr. Khanna votes aye. Mr. Mfume. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
Aye.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye. Ms. Porter. Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Bush. Mr. Gomez.
Aye.
Mr. Gomez votes aye. Ms. Brown.
Aye.
Ms. Brown votes aye. Ms. Stansbury. Ms. Stansbury votes yes. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Frost. Mr. Frost votes aye. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee votes yes. Mr. Kassar. Ms. Crockett.
Aye.
Ms. Crockett votes aye. Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman votes aye. Mr. Moskowitz. Mr. Moskowitz votes aye. Ms. Tlaib. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman votes no.
Will the clerk call the roll? How is Mr. Kassar recorded?
Mr. Kassar is not recorded. Mr. Kassar votes yes.
How is Mr. Fallon recorded?
Mr. Fallon was not yet recorded. Mr. Fallon votes no.
How's Mr. Langworthy recorded?
Mr. Langworthy is not yet recorded. Mr. Langworthy votes no.
How's Ms. Tlaib recorded?
Ms. Tlaib is not yet recorded.
She voted yes.
Ms. Tlaib votes yes.
The clerk report.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 18, the nays are 22.
Okay. The noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to. The question now is on the previously postponed amendment to the amendment in the nature of substitute offered by.
Just while we're sitting here, head coach of the Alabama Crimson
Frost.
Tide, Nick Saban, has just retired. Just did a short video
Clerk
on
will
it
call the
on
roll.
mine and Dylan's
Jordan.
Sports channel. It's about 2 minutes long.
Mr. Turner.
And it kind of breaks down everything.
Mr.
So if you're
Gosar.
into college
Mr.
football,
Gosar votes no.
the GOAT has
Ms. Fox.
retired. Go check it
Ms.
out.
Fox votes no. Mr. Grothman. Mr. Grothman votes no. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes no.
That's my other
Mr.
channel.
Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes no. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes no. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes no. Ms. Mace. Ms. Mace votes no. Mr. LaTurner. Mr. LaTurner votes no. Mr. Fallon. Mr. Fallon votes no. Mr. Donalds. Mr. Donalds votes no. Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry votes no. Mr. Timmons. Mr. Timmons votes no. Mr. Burchett.
He's pretty iconic. Yeah,
Ms.
Transfer
Green.
Portal is going to light up hardcore.
Ms. Green votes no. Ms. McLean.
100%. It's going to be
Ms.
interesting to see who
McLean
goes there.
votes
but
no. Ms. Bobert.
I won't talk about it too much here.
Mr.
Like
Fry.
I said, I did the short video over there.
Mr. Fry
on my,
votes no.
my other,
Ms.
other
Luna.
channel. Well, my other
Ms.
channel.
Luna votes no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy
If you're into
votes
sports,
no. Mr.
Dylan and I
Burleson.
do a lot of
Mr.
stuff over there.
Burleson
We're
votes
going
no.
to do a lot of
Mr.
stuff over there.
Mr. Waltz votes no. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Norton.
Aye.
Ms. Norton votes aye. Mr. Lynch.
Aye.
Mr. Lynch votes aye. Mr. Connolly.
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes aye. Mr. Krishnamurthy. Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Khanna.
Aye.
Mr. Khanna votes aye. Mr. Mfume.
Aye.
Mr. Mfume votes aye. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye. Ms. Porter. Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Bush.
I know. I don't understand the
Gomez.
recorded votes every time. It makes
Mr. Gomez
zero
votes
difference
aye.
at
Ms.
all.
Brown. Ms. Brown votes aye. Ms. Stansbury. Ms. Stansbury votes yes. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes aye. Mr. Frost.
Yep.
Mr. Frost votes aye. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee votes yes. Mr. Kassar. Mr. Kassar votes yes. Ms. Crockett.
Aye.
Jason, I
Ms.
will
Crockett
time you
votes
out.
aye. Mr. Goldman. Mr. Goldman votes aye. Mr. Moskowitz. Mr. Moskowitz votes aye. Ms. Talib. Ms. Talib votes yes. Mr. Chairman.
No. And how is Mr. Burchett recorded?
Mr. Chairman votes no. Mr. Burchett is not yet recorded.
How, Mr. Burchett votes no. How is Mr. Turner recorded?
Mr. Burchett votes no. Mr. Turner is not yet recorded. Mr. Turner votes no.
Will the clerk tally? It's 24 to 20.
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the nays are 24, the ayes are 20.
The noes have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Shocker.
The question is now on the previously postponed amendment in the nature of substitute. This is the chairman's amendment.
Why don't they
on the
just
Crockett
suspended all the votes?
The clerk will call the roll on the Crockett amendment.
Mr. Jordan.
Okay, so I think they're just doing votes.
Mr.
So
Turner.
should we go back and here, I'll throw a poll up.
Mr. Turner votes no. Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes no. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox votes no. Mr. Grothman. Mr. Grothman votes no. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes no. Mr. Palmer. Mr. Palmer votes no. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes no. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes no. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes no. Ms. Mace. Ms. Mace votes no. Mr. LaTurner. Mr. LaTurner votes no. Mr. Fallon.
There's a poll up.
Mr. Fallon votes no.
Will
Mr.
it
Donalds.
run for a minute? Because I think what they did is had
Mr.
all the
Donalds
debates and
votes
then
no. Mr.
suspended
Perry.
the votes till the
Mr.
end.
Perry votes no. Mr. Timmons.
So if that's
Mr. Timmons
right.
votes no.
That's what I'm
Mr.
saying.
Burchett.
We already know what the hell's going
Mr.
on.
Burchett
So
votes no.
I
Ms.
think it'd be
Green.
better if we go back to the beginning.
Ms. Green votes no.
Start
Ms.
watching
McLean.
as much as we can get in.
Ms. McLean
I
votes
don't think we
no.
can get
Ms.
it all
Wilbert.
in because I have a show in 3
Mr.
hours.
Fry.
But we can get
Mr. Fry
a good
votes
portion
no.
of
Ms.
it in.
Luna.
So and then I'll pick
Ms.
up
Luna
whatever
votes
tomorrow.
no. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy votes
Chairman
no.
Jordan
Mr.
also had a
Burleson.
hearing earlier.
Mr. Burleson votes no. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Waltz votes no. Mr. Raskin.
Aye.
Mr. Raskin votes aye. Ms. Norton.
Aye.
So I'm
Ms.
wondering if
Norton
that's a
votes
good place
aye.
to
Mr.
start.
Lynch. Mr. Lynch votes aye. Mr. Connolly.
Aye.
Mr. Connolly votes aye. Mr. Krishnamurthy. Mr. Krishnamurthy votes aye. Mr. Khanna.
Aye.
Mr. Khanna votes aye. Mr. Mfume.
Aye.
Mr. Mfume votes aye. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes aye. Ms. Porter. Ms. Porter votes aye. Ms. Bush. Mr. Gomez. Mr. Gomez votes aye. Ms. Brown. Ms. Brown votes aye. Ms. Stansbury. Ms. Stansbury votes yes. Mr. Garcia. Mr. Garcia votes yes. Mr. Frost. Mr. Frost votes yes. Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee votes yes. Mr. Kassar. Mr. Kassar
See,
votes
they
yes.
all mark
Ms.
it up,
Crockett.
and then they're all gonna
Ms.
fucking
Crockett
strike
votes
me.
aye. Mr.
Every
Goldman.
single one of them.
Mr. Goldman votes aye. Mr. Moskowitz. Mr. Moskowitz votes aye.
They
Ms.
put their
Talib.
stuff all over it, and then they're like,
Ms.
"Oh,
Talib
that's our
votes
footage.
yes.
We
Mr.
put our
Chairman.
logo on the front of it."
No.
Mr. Chairman votes no.
Does any other member wish to vote? Seeing none, will the clerk report the tally?
Mr. Chairman, on this vote, the ayes are 20, the nays are 24.
The nays have it, and the amendment is not agreed to.
Oh, big surprise!
The question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the contempt report. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying nay. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The amendment in the nature of a substitute to the report is agreed to. The question is on favorably reporting the report. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan. Mr. Turner. Mr. Turner votes yes. Mr. Gosar. Mr. Gosar votes yes. Ms. Fox. Ms. Fox votes yes. Mr. Grothman. Mr. Grothman votes yes. Mr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud votes yes. Mr. Palmer.
Thank you for coming.
Mr. Palmer votes yes. Mr. Higgins. Mr. Higgins votes yes. Mr. Sessions. Mr. Sessions votes yes. Mr. Biggs. Mr. Biggs votes yes. Ms. Mace. Ms. Mace votes yes. Mr. LaTurner. Mr. LaTurner votes yes.
That's the
Mr.
other
Fallon.
one. So did they not?
Mr. Fallon votes yes.
I don't
Mr.
see the
Donalds.
first portion of it.
Mr. Donalds votes yes. Mr. Perry. Mr. Perry votes aye. Mr. Timmons. Mr. Timmons votes aye. Mr. Burchett.
God, they have it cut up
Mr.
so
Burchett
weird.
votes aye. Miss Green. Miss Green votes yes. Miss McLean. Miss McLean votes yes. Miss Boebert. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry votes aye. Miss Luna. Miss Luna votes aye. Mr. Langworthy. Mr. Langworthy votes aye. Mr. Burleson. Mr. Burleson votes aye. Mr. Waltz. Mr. Waltz votes aye. Mr. Raskin.
No.
Mr. Raskin votes
Okay,
no.
so that's the
Miss
poll.
Norton.
I'm just
No.
looking for
Miss
the
Norton votes no. Mr. Lynch.
No.
Mr.
start
Lynch
of it
votes no. Mr.
because
Connolly.
it's
Nay.
weird.
Mr.
And
Connolly
then we'll
votes
switch
nay.
over there.
Mr. Krishnamurthy. Mr. Krishnamurthy votes no. Mr. Khanna.
No.
Mr. Khanna
I
votes
just saw
no.
it.
Mr. Mfume.
No.
Mr. Mfume votes no. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez.
Nay.
Ms. Ocasio-Cortez votes nay. Ms. Porter. Ms.
There you go.
Porter
I'll
votes
just deal with
no.
Forbes after. So here is, actually, let me move. Nope, I don't want that one. I want that one. Hey, that works. Just give me one moment. There we go. Gone. All right, so this is the House Judiciary Committee. This is this morning's. There's a break in there, but we should probably be able to get all of it in before my other show. So we'll start this right now.
The chair may postpone further proceedings today on the question of approving any measure or matter or adopting an amendment for which a recorded vote is ordered. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas. Gentleman from Texas to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Hi, Jason. I'll look at it. Fucking Twitter's not working for me right now.
One nation, under God, indivisible,
Indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Pursuant to notice, I call up the report recommending that the House of Representatives cite Robert Hunter Biden for contempt of Congress and move that the committee report it to the House. The clerk will report the report.
Resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Robert Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress.
I will
for
certainly
refusal
show
to
that
Without
comply.
objection, the
later.
report will be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. The chair now recognizes himself for an opening statement. Who is the big guy?
All right, I'm gonna just
We all
set the
know.
layout now so we
all
can get
think
it
we
in.
know. Seems pretty common sense, but who is it? That's one of the questions we'd want to ask Hunter Biden. What was the business? What was the service that the Bidens provided? What was the president's son doing to earn millions of dollars from foreign entities in jobs he wasn't qualified to have? And what did the president know about his family's foreign financial entanglements? These are just some of the questions that Congress needs answers to as part of our impeachment inquiry. To get those answers, the Oversight Committee and the Judiciary Committee issued subpoenas to Mr. Biden, compelling him to appear for a joint deposition on December 13th. Mr. Biden came to the Capitol on December 13th, but did not come to the committees for that deposition. Instead, he staged a press conference in front of the Capitol. This flagrant disregard for Congress's constitutional oversight role clearly merits a citation of contempt. It's an open and shut case. Mr. Biden was issued an authorized subpoena, and without asserting any valid privilege, frankly, I don't think he asserted any privilege, valid or not, he didn't show up to testify. This is a vote to protect our institution. Hunter Biden is a critical witness in the House's official impeachment inquiry and uniquely possesses knowledge about what role the president may have played in leveraging policymaking decisions to enrich the Biden family. Of course, the American people deserve to hear directly from Hunter Biden about these facts. And we fully intend for Mr. Biden to testify before the public. But as is often the practice across committees under Republicans and Democrats, he should first sit for a deposition so that the American people get a full airing of the facts. Here's just a few things we need Hunter Biden to shed more light on. During a transcribed interview with the Oversight Committee, Devin Archer, longtime associate of Mr. Biden, described how President Biden was, quote, the brand, and was used to send, quote, signals of power, access, and influence to enrich the Biden family from foreign sources while he served as vice president. Mr. Archer testified that Mr. Biden placed his father on speakerphone during meetings with business associates approximately 20 times. We know one of those calls was made on December 4th, 2015. On that date, while Hunter Biden was in Dubai with Burisma executives Mr. Zolochevsky and Mr. Pizarski, they asked Hunter Biden to help alleviate the pressure they were under from the prosecutor in Ukraine. According to Mr. Archer, after that request was made, Hunter Biden, quote, called his dad. We know that a year after Hunter Biden was put on the board of Burisma, Vice President Biden attended a dinner at Cafe Milano on April 16th, 2015 with Mr. Pizarski and Hunter Biden and Devin Archer. Devin Archer, who was also on this Ukrainian energy company's board. What then Vice President Biden did with Burisma is the blueprint for how this whole influence peddling scheme worked. There are four fundamental facts about the Biden's involvement with this company. Fact number one, Hunter Biden was put on the board of Burisma's, board of directors of Burisma and made millions of dollars. Fact number two, Hunter Biden was not qualified to be on the board. Not my words. He said so himself in an interview on ABC News. Fact number three, Burisma executives asked Hunter Biden to help alleviate the pressure they were under from the prosecutor in Ukraine. Fact number four, Vice President Biden used his official position to hold up American tax dollars going to Ukraine until that pressure was off Burisma. He conditioned the release of funds on the firing of the prosecutor who was applying the pressure to the company that his son sat on the board of. And these facts are corroborated with the confidential human source who told the FBI and was recorded in the 1023 form. In fact, the prosecutor, Victor Shokin, is mentioned 8 times by the confidential human source in that 1023 form. That same form, by the way, that Director Wray tried to prevent Congress from seeing. Confidential human source said Burisma hired Hunter Biden to protect us through his dad from all kinds of problems. In addition to all that, the House Ways and Means Committee uncovered a threatening 2017 message from Mr. Biden to a Chinese business executive related to a business deal in which Mr. Biden wrote, quote, I'm sitting here with my father, and we would like to understand why the commitment made has not been fulfilled. 9 days later, Mr. Biden invoked his father in that threatening message. A company affiliated with that business wired $5 million to a company jointly established by Mr. Biden. The same day, Mr. Biden transferred $400,000 from this joint venture to his personal company, and it appears now that President Biden ultimately received $40,000 of those proceeds. Rather than come before us and answer questions about these and other concurring instances of the Biden family trading cash for influence, Hunter Biden held a press conference a few hundred yards away from here, press conference where he said, I'm happy to answer questions in public, but when he finished his statement, he abruptly left, taking no questions from the press. We have no choice but to hold Mr. Biden in contempt, and I would encourage a yes vote. Would now yield to the ranking member for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After a year like 2023, a year marked in the House of Representatives by Republican infighting, the ouster of a speaker, and growing legal peril for the former president, you would think that House Republicans would want to turn the page and try their hand at some actual legislating. It is unfortunate, but not surprising, that the MAGA wing of the Republican Party seems impervious to learning from its recent past. They seem committed to the same political stunts that have, by any measure, made their majority the least productive Congress in modern history. Their own members acknowledge how little they have accomplished. So here we are again, just days before a government shutdown, with war raging in Gaza and Ukraine, with Americans at home facing real problems that require our attention. House Republicans want us to know that their highest priority is, once again, Hunter Biden. And why are they chasing Hunter Biden? They're certainly not chasing him because they have uncovered evidence of any wrongdoing by President Biden or the Biden administration. Over the course of this investigation, such as it is, we have collected thousands of pages of documents and spoken to more than a dozen witnesses. One of those witnesses was Special Counsel David Weiss, who took the unprecedented step of sitting for an interview in the middle of an ongoing criminal investigation. After all of that work, House Republicans have found not a shred of evidence to suggest that President Biden was anything other than a supportive father to his son, or that his administration in any way exerted political pressure on the investigation into Hunter Biden's conduct. True, every few days, House Republicans hold up some copy of a bank record or excerpt from a transcript and claim that at long last they have finally found the smoking gun. But like clockwork, often within minutes, each new claim is thoroughly debunked. Then a few days pass and they do it again, and round we go. If Chairman Jordan and Chairman Comer were really interested in letting the American people see just how little they have found to support their accusations, they would release the transcripts of our interviews in full, instead of cherry-picking words out of context to mislead the public. For that matter, if House Republicans were genuinely
Theoretically, he
interested in
could be
hearing
jailed,
testimony
Dazer,
from Hunter
but
Biden,
he won't be.
they would have honored their initial offer to have Mr. Biden testify in public. I understand Mr. Biden is still willing to appear at a public hearing at the time and place of the chairman's choosing. I hear my Republican colleagues when they say that a congressional subpoena must be honored exactly as it is written. But you will forgive me if their newfound care for the institution sounds a little thin. This whole investigation is premised on the claim that the president is somehow profiting from his office. Let's set aside for the moment that the fact that this claim is entirely evidence-free. No, I have trouble taking this new interest in foreign corruption seriously because these same Republicans did nothing while President Trump took millions from foreign interests in violation of the Emoluments Clause to the Constitution. Thanks to our Democratic colleagues on the Oversight Committee, we now know that Trump received at least $7.8 million from 20 foreign governments, including the governments of China, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, while he was in office and while he was negotiating with those same governments. Unless it is to defend the former president, House Republicans are steadfastly silent when it comes to Donald Trump's actual, open, documented corruption. But they need to hold Hunter Biden in contempt because he once paid his father $1,400 for a 2018 Ford Raptor? Please. Republicans say that this contempt vote is necessary because it's important for the committee to defend its prerogatives. Again, this new concern for the rights and privileges of the Judiciary Committee seems wholly insincere. As we speak, the Homeland Security Committee is holding an impeachment hearing. By all reports, they intend to bypass judiciary altogether to bring articles of impeachment to the floor. The Constitution gives the sole power of impeachment to the House of Representatives. And for the whole of modern history, the House has delegated that authority to this committee until today. I do not know whether the decision to cede our jurisdiction to House Homeland was made with Chairman Jordan's blessing or over his objection. But either way, it is a terrible precedent. The decision has permanently diminished us. It weakens future chairmen of both parties. And you have ceded this ground, apparently, so that you have time to bully the president's son. And let us not forget the elephant in the room. House Republicans say that we must force Hunter Biden to comply with this subpoena. But they said nothing when Attorney General Barr and White House counsel Don McGahn stonewalled this committee. They cheered the former president on when he vowed never to comply with any of our requests. and the chairman himself blew off a valid subpoena for his testimony from the January 6th Select Committee. What chutzpah, what gall. Whatever technical excuses you made for yourself at the time, Mr. Chairman, I assure you, Hunter Biden is the same. This committee has an obligation to work in good faith towards an accommodation with Hunter Biden, and to my knowledge, there is no precedent for holding a person in contempt who remains willing to testify. You may score points with the MAGA base by forcing this vote today, but you threaten to do real damage to our ability to secure evidence and testimony in the future. As with so much of this Republican Congress, there is a reasonable deal to be had here. House Republicans just refuse to take it. This contempt report is poorly timed, riddled with factual errors, and rife with hypocrisy. It has nothing to do with solving real problems for real people. I urge my colleagues to oppose it, and I hold out hope that this committee will return to more pressing work someday soon. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes himself for the purpose of offering an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee report for the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives.
Without objection, the amendment in the nature of a substitute will be considered as read and shall be considered as base text for the purpose of the amendment. The chair now recognizes himself to explain the amendment. This amendment makes a small grammatical change on page 17 of the report and does not affect the substance of the report. I yield back. Who seeks recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from California, Mr. Swallow is recognized. And I'll come to you, I think. Fitz.
Mr. Chairman, is this a joke? No, seriously, is this hearing a joke? This is a committee that now cares about subpoena compliance, and we're going to hold somebody in contempt for subpoena compliance? That's really interesting because to me, it seems like you believe we all had our memories wiped 608 days ago when you failed to honor your own subpoena. You see, on May 31, 2022, as the January 6th committee was investigating the greatest crime ever committed in America with the most arrests, the most convictions, a crime against our Congress, our Constitution, our democracy, all they wanted was for you and a few of your colleagues to cooperate, to provide any information you had. And what you all did for 608 days and counting, you didn't show up. And you want us to take this proceeding seriously, where you have an issue with somebody else's compliance with a subpoena, somebody who actually is willing to come forward publicly, something you were not willing to do, something you and Mr. McCarthy and others who were asked to testify were not willing to do. So seriously, is this a joke? If it's a joke, great. This whole Congress has been a joke, so it would be in line and on brand with what has been taking place. But I have to ask, like, how dumb do you think the American people are that you would seek to hold someone in contempt when you are 608 days, 15 hours, 21 minutes, and 47 seconds out of compliance of your own subpoena? I don't know, Mr. Chairman, if it is your practice to look the other way when crimes are committed, but it's not my practice, and it's not my colleagues' practice. So what is this really all about? It's about this chairman, Speaker Johnson, and the MAGA majority acting as Insurrection LLP, creating the biggest law firm in Washington, D.C., to work every single day in this building on behalf of just one client, the former president, Donald Trump, and to carry out his petty grievances every single day. Okay, that's great. You won the majority. It's your prerogative. But the cost to the American people is we aren't doing a single thing in this committee to address gun violence, the mass shootings that occurred in the 3 weeks that we were gone. We haven't done anything to address what's going on at the border, a president who's willing to negotiate and find ways to better secure it. We're not doing anything to bring down the cost of healthcare and take on the pocketbook, financial breathing room issues that the American people care about. Okay, let's talk about Hunter. Mr. Comer and Mr. Jordan said, we want Hunter Biden to come in. Hunter Biden said, okay, I will come in. Mr. Comer said 2 different times, we will take his testimony publicly or we will take it privately. We will take it publicly or we will take it privately. Hunter Biden said, okay, let's do it publicly. I don't trust you all to take it privately because you haven't released the depositions that you have taken privately. Can't blame him for that. He wants to come in and testify publicly. You won't take yes for an answer, and so then you move it to let's take it privately. I think you want to take it privately because you have nothing. I think you want to take it privately because you don't want to see Marjorie Taylor Greene display the non-consensual nudes from Hunter's laptop again. I think that's why you want to take it privately. But he comes in anyway. You won't take yes for an answer. And let me just break some news for you, Mr. Chairman. Just down the hallway, Hunter Biden is sitting in the Oversight Committee. He's ready to testify publicly, it appears. So let me just challenge you one more time. If you're so eager to take his testimony publicly, I move that we adjourn right now and take his public testimony and bring him in here right now.
Is the gentleman making a motion?
Yes.
Question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor will say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no.
No.
Opinion of the
Recorded
chair, the
vote.
noes have it.
Recorded
Gentleman's
vote.
requested a recorded vote. Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Isa? No. Mr. Isa votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates votes no. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? No. Mr. Massey votes no. Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Ms. Sparts? Ms. Sparts votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes no. Mr. Bentz? Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes no. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes no. Mr. Van Drew?
No.
Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels?
No.
Mr. Nels votes no. Mr. Moore? Mr. Kiley? Mr. Kiley votes no. Ms. Hageman? Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moran? Ms. Lee? Mr. Hunt? Mr. Fry? Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Nadler?
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren? Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Johnson? Mr. Johnson votes aye. Mr. Schiff? Mr. Schiff votes aye. Mr. Swalwell? Mr. Swalwell votes aye. Mr. Liu? Ms. Jayapal? Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Mr. Correa? Ms. Scanlon? Mr. Nagoose? Ms. McBath? Ms. Dean? Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar? Ms. Ross? Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush? Mr. Ivy?
Aye.
Mr. Ivy votes aye. Ms. Ballant? Ms. Ballant votes aye.
What's the number?
Gentlelady from Texas.
Ms. Escobar votes yes.
Gentleman from North Dakota.
Mr. Armstrong votes no.
All members voted. Clerk will tally and report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 12 ayes and 15 noes.
The motion to adjourn is not agreed to. Gentleman from California yields back. He yielded back. Oh, I'm sorry. The chair
I yield
recommend- the chair recommends himself. I would just say this. Why didn't they hold me in contempt?
I move to
Why
hold
didn't,
your.
why didn't the committee hold me? They certainly could have. It was a completely
So
partisan
moved.
Would the
committee.
gentleman yield? And I'll explain why.
No. In a second, I want to finish my my time here. It was a completely partisan committee. Why not do? I mean, the idea that if you could have held the future Speaker of the House, the future Chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the Freedom in contempt, why didn't you do it? I think they didn't do it because they knew it was bogus. They knew that the speech or debate clause would not allow them to compel someone member of Congress to come testify. But by the way, I never said I wouldn't testify. I wrote an 11-page letter to Chairman Thompson. I'm still waiting on a response where I spelled out all the concerns we had with this committee, all the things we had caught them saying that were not accurate.
Will the gentleman yield?
No, it's my 5 minutes. I'll yield and we'll have plenty of time. I'm sure there'll be a debate. They never made a record of it. We made a record of Hunter Biden not showing last week. We actually had a court reporter there. We made a record of him not showing up for his deposition when he was over doing a press conference on the Capitol, outside the Capitol. So I think the Democrats know how ridiculous that was. And with that, I would yield to the gentleman from California.
I think the chairman, my colleague, Mr. Swalwell, who participated in that contempt by asking for and holding that press conference for Hunter Biden, knows very well the history of this committee. This committee has always enforced our legitimate subpoenas. When I was an early member of this committee, then Chairman Conyers, John Conyers, held the Bush White House in contempt, took it all the way through, and Judge Bates, a appointee of President George W. Bush, held that in fact you must come before this committee. There's no question that after we go through this process of contempt, a floor vote, and ultimately a court challenge, that Hunter Biden will be ordered to come here. He'll be ordered to come here for the same reason that Harriet Myers was ordered to show up when George W. Bush, within his rights, fired 9 of his own appointees, and this committee had questions as to the motive. That's a sad piece of history for some of us, because some of us were not supportive of that contempt motion. But in retrospect, this committee has always asserted its rights when those rights were violated, and they were violated by Hunter Biden. And they are still to this day being violated, except as Congressman Swalwell just made very clear, Hunter Biden is thumbing his nose not once during the day of his subpoena, but even today, while he sits over in a hearing, not testifying, simply sort of going, nah, I've got you. Well, you know what? This is too serious a committee. This is not a joke, Mr. Swalwell. This is the most significant committee of the Congress because we take seriously people coming before it. We take serious the threat of impeachment. And in fact, we are the committee that when impeachment does happen, it has to come through. So quite frankly, this is not a joke. I look forward to us marking this up, moving it out, having a vote on it, and ultimately getting Hunter Biden to answer questions about his undoubted selling of the Vice President of the United States, of his last name, selling it around the world to countries including Russia, Ukraine, China, and others. I don't think there's any question that the evidence is clear. Now the question is, will he come forward or will he take the fifth? And I'm going to predict, Mr. Chairman, that when it's all said and done, Hunter Biden will simply take the fifth. He's just trying to delay that as long as he can. And if he can, he'd like to have it like a few others have over the years, where he makes a speech about his innocence and then takes the fifth. You and I were there for that when the IRS did that. I believe we're going to see that. But whether it occurs publicly or privately does make a difference. If he's just going to take the fifth, which I suspect he ultimately will, then he should do it behind closed doors and not have a public stage to do it. And Mr. Swalwell, you can chastise the chairman, but subpoenaing members of Congress is something we do not do under speech and debate for good and valid reason. It's the reason that you're not subpoenaed here today in this contempt after what you did with Hunter Biden. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The gentleman from California is recognized as the gentleman.
Gentleman has an amendment at the desk.
Amendment at the desk. The clerk will report.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute.
Reserve, point
committee
of order.
report for the resolution recommending that the House of Representatives find Robert Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress for a refusal to comply with the subpoena duly issued.
Without objection, the amendment be considered as read. The the gentleman from California is recognized to explain his amendment.
Today, Chairman Jim Jordan has convened a hearing to take action against someone he says ignored a congressional subpoena. Today, Jim Jordan says that failure of this witness to appear was, quote, in blatant disregard of Congress's oversight role. Today, Jim Jordan says we must respond because, quote, he didn't show up to testify, unquote. And I say, bravo. Jim Jordan is finally ready to take action against Jim Jordan. This amendment would amend the contempt resolution and provide the form of the resolution that the Committee on the Judiciary would recommend to the House of Representatives, citing Robert Hunter Biden and Jim Jordan for contempt of Congress, pursuant to this report as follows. Resolved that Robert Hunter Biden and Jim Jordan shall be found in contempt of Congress for failure to comply with a congressional subpoena. Now, I know the chairman wouldn't want an ordinary citizen to be treated differently than a member of Congress. So let's run through some of the facts. On December 22nd, the Select Committee of Congress investigating a violent attack on the Capitol requested that Jim Jordan provide information for the committee's investigation. Knowing that Mr. Jordan was a recipient witness to some of these events, had conversations with those involved in planning efforts to overturn the election. On January 9th, Jordan responded to the Select Committee's request with a letter refusing to comply. On May 12th of 2022, the Select Committee subpoenaed Jim Jordan, along with others, for deposition testimony as part of our investigation into the January 6th attack. On May 27th, Jordan failed to appear for his scheduled deposition before the Committee of Congress. On May 31st, the Select Committee indicated that Representative Jordan should appear for deposition testimony no later than June 11th. But Representative Jordan once again did not appear before the Select Committee on or before the June 11th, 2022 deadline, and he was referred to the Committee on Ethics. And so today we can remedy this situation. We can show some consistency if we're going to hold Hunter Biden in contempt for not showing up before the committee when he's offered to come and testify publicly. But if we're going to hold him in contempt for that, then surely we would hold Jim Jordan in contempt for his failure to appear before Congress. So this amendment would simply add Jim Jordan's failure to appear before Congress, his blatant disregard of congressional oversight, to use the words of the chairman himself, and remedy this by including him in the contempt report, referring to prosecution for potential prosecution for contempt of Congress. And I would urge everyone's support. And with that, I'm happy to yield to any of my colleagues. I yield to Mr. Nadler.
Thank you. Let me just say that I will vote for this amendment with misgivings. I will vote for it because it improves the resolution. I will vote for it with misgivings because it cites Hunter Biden for contempt, while in fact Hunter Biden has repeatedly stated his willingness to come before this committee in open session and to come before the Oversight Committee in open session, and he's there right now. So he should not be cited for contempt because he's willing to testify. He's volunteered repeatedly to testify before either or both committees. I will vote for the amendment nonetheless because it does improve this terrible underlying resolution. I thank you. I yield back.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd be happy to yield.
I will also support this with some misgivings. The committee, when the chairman refused to comply with our subpoena, the January 6th subpoena, did have a discussion about enforcement. And by the way, the speech or debate clause does not apply because the Constitution says that members may not be called to account in any other body. And in fact, it isn't another body, it's the House of Representatives. So speech or debate does not protect. But in our discussions, we had a concern about separation of powers and referring the members of Congress to another branch of government for enforcement of our subpoena. That is why we sent this to the Ethics Committee. However, given that the chairman apparently is critical of that suggestion, I will support Mr. Schiff's amendment. I would just like to note, if I may also, that there has been some considerable confusion about the committee's position on public testimony. No potential witness insisted to the committee that they testify in public. Had they done so, we would have been forced to allow that to occur. Public as composed to formal hearings in the Cannon office building. Mr. Bannon never agreed
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
to testify and
Point of order, Mr.
unfortunately
Chairman.
refused to send documents. So that as a precedent is simply inappropriate. And I yield back to the gentleman from California with
Time has
thanks.
expired. Does the gentleman insist on his point of order?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman is recognized.
For a number of reasons, Rule 10 confers on the Committee on Ethics exclusive jurisdiction over members of Congress. Additionally, Rule 16, Clause 7 puts this outside of our jurisdiction. And Mr. Chairman, in an analog way, it is clear that the January 6th committee expired at the end of the last Congress without ever making any sort of a motion or referral. In fact, they seem to have ignored your responses. In ignoring your responses, they very clearly accepted your non-appearance. And although they would like to rewrite history now, they had an opportunity to take action. They did not take action. So for those rules of the Congress, in addition to the common sense that there is no subpoena in place, because subpoenas, as you know, expire at the end of a Congress, as did the January 6th committee, I would continue to hold this as out of order.
Chairman.
Gentleman from the ranking members recognized.
What Mr. Issa said is a very interesting statement, but I don't understand what his point of order is. What is he objecting to?
Yes, it's beyond the scope and purpose of today's resolution. In other words, you can't amend it to add under Rule 16, Clause 7.
Gentleman.
Are you making a point of order against the amendment?
Yeah. The gentleman's amendment does not satisfy, the gentleman from California's amendment does not satisfy the subject matter and fundamental purpose test, therefore is not germane and is out of order. Who seeks recognition?
Mr. Chairman, on that point, before the chair rules.
I've already ruled, but the
I would appeal the ruling of the chair.
gentleman is recognized to appeal the ruling of the chair. Gentleman appeals the ruling of the chair.
The motion is not beyond the scope of this report because
You've already made a motion to appeal the ruling of the chair because I already ruled. So the clerk will call the roll on appealing.
Mr. Chairman, I move to table.
Gentleman moves to table. The motion. Motion is not debatable. The question is on the motion to table. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
No.
Opinion of the chair is the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, we request a recorded vote.
Gentleman from California requests a recorded vote. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
Yes.
Mr. Jordan votes yes. Mr. Issa?
Aye.
Mr. Issa votes aye. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Gates votes aye. Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes aye. Mr. McClintock? Mr. McClintock votes aye. Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Massey? Mr. Massey votes aye. Mr. Roy? Mr. Bishop? Mr. Bishop votes aye. Ms. Sparks? Ms. Sparks votes yes. Mr. Fitzgerald? Mr. Fitzgerald votes aye. Mr. Bentz? Mr. Bentz votes yes. Mr. Klein? Mr. Klein votes aye. Mr. Armstrong? Mr. Armstrong votes yes. Mr. Gooden? Mr. Gooden votes yes. Moore? Ms. Hageman votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee? Ms. Jackson Lee votes no. Mr. Cohen? Mr. Cohen votes no. Mr. Johnson?
No.
Mr. Johnson votes no. Mr. Schiff?
No.
Mr. Schiff votes no. Mr. Swalwell? Lynn? Ms. McBasketball? No. Mr. Chairman, there are 18 ayes and 13.
The motion to table the ruling of the appeal of the chair is agreed to. And who
Mr.
seeks
Chairman,
seeks recognition?
I have unanimous consent requests.
Gentleman from Kentucky is recognized for a UC.
I asked unanimous consent to enter into the record an article titled, "During January 6th hearing, Schiff doctored text messages between Mark Meadows and Rep. Jim Jordan." This was an article in the Federalist, December 15th, 2021.
Without objection, who's next on our list? Ms. Jackson Lee. Gentleman from Texas, recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you. I asked to strike the last word. I want to follow up on my friend from California, Mr. Iser, about the importance and the level of cruciality, I use that terminology, of this committee's work. It is constitutionally grounded. And there's no other committee in the House and its counterpart in the Senate that has the custodial responsibilities of the accuracy and the integrity of the Constitution. That means that we should take our work extensively and very seriously. We can begin to quote documents which include the very essence of our message. And I always like to remind you that the Constitution begins by saying, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility." But I'd like to focus on the idea of establish justice. We can procedurally try to maneuver my good friend's inactions of not showing this committee respect by not appearing and responding to the subpoena. I called Chairman Jordan my good friend because we've worked together for years. But you did not show up and present yourself to this committee, whether or not it was in this session or the last session. Now, as we proceed, we will hear on the other side a constant pointing to members who did their service on the January 6th committee. They will take pot shots at Mr. Schiff. They will find dated and unheard commentary that they will utilize, which I believe will continue to diminish the importance and integrity of this particular session and constitutional responsibilities of impeachment. I too was going to have misgivings of the amendment that would have joined Mr. Jordan, because I am not ceding the point that Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden, should be held in contempt. And I will continue that approach through the rest of this markup. There is no evidence. How can you have evidence of contempt when you have an open and public statement that I will appear? I will appear. I will use my constitutional rights of appearing with counsel, and I will come before the committee. I was there on that day when he was available to come. How can you argue that he did not come when you made no effort to indicate that we are waiting for you in the hearing room, set up for you to come now and speak? That was not done. And if I want to go a step further, I'm not suggesting to Mr. Biden that I would want that to be the case, but no law enforcement was sent to direct him to the Judiciary Committee room in 2141 Rayburn on the House side. Contempt. The only argument you want is to continue to give a circus-like atmosphere to this very important committee that under the Constitution is to be able to establish justice. Justice. There is no cause for what we're doing today. There is no basis for it. There is no evidence for it. There is no reason for it. Again, I do not believe Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden, should be held in contempt. All of the allegations that you have are simply that. allegations of the abuse of power, the misuse of the relationship of father and son. All of that has to be proven. But you are going at it, and we will hear all of these bits and pieces and drops from the January 6th committee and so-called interactions between members on that committee that you either like or dislike, and we all will probably have a say in that. You cannot take away the sacred responsibility of the January 6th and this committee that is constitutionally grounded. So, Mr. Chairman, I want to be clear. I would not have been happy voting on that particular amendment because I think that yours should have been separate. And I do not believe that Mr. Biden, Hunter Biden, should be held in contempt at all, because I was there with you, Mr. Chairman, on that day, and you did not seem to make any effort to make sure that Mr. Biden knew he was welcome in that committee at that time for us to hear him in an open setting. With that, I hope that we can establish justice in this committee for once and for all, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Bishop, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I submit that whenever you have an issue under debate, the surest sign of weakness in an argument is to avoid the question, to talk about anything but the question in issue. Now, I do compliment the gentlelady from Texas for her point just made. She focused on the issue, but I do eagerly undertake her challenge. She says, you cannot make an argument that Hunter Biden is in contempt. How can you argue he will not come? She said, when he said he would come. Well, here's how. He was issued a subpoena for a deposition. He stated publicly and in correspondence that he would not testify in a deposition, that he wanted to do it his way in an open hearing. Well, that's contempt. And it is open and shut, cut and dried, as simple as it can possibly be. So that the subject under debate is whether an ordinary citizen who defies a subpoena of a congressional impeachment inquiry should be held to account. And there is also no need really to debate that. Quite to the contrary from the suggestion of the gentlelady from California, the weight is all on the other side. And interestingly enough, in the matters of Bannon and Navarro, every member of the minority is on record to that effect. Indeed, members of the minority have gone farther than that. Mr. Raskin has specifically addressed the purported basis for objection that Hunter Biden has offered, stating that the proper course is to first have private testimony in a deposition to explore facts thoroughly and in the way that that mode of examination permits, and then to have a public hearing after. Nobody that I can recall in the minority took issue with that point. But here's really the salient and final aspect that makes this clear beyond argument. This may be the most brazenly recalcitrant witness defying Congress in the history of the Congress that I'm aware of. Now, there may be some other situation in which this has been done. But the person who is subject to the subpoena, I hear the laughter on the other side, so let me go further. I don't know that anyone has ever come onto the complex in the shadow of the United States Capitol building, suborned and assisted by another member of Congress, a member of this committee, stood in the triangle and vowed to the media that he was defying the subpoena of a congressional impeachment inquiry. I don't know that that's ever been done. And I certainly don't believe that it's ever been the case that a member of Congress has made arrangements for that brazen defiance of Congress to be expressed on the Capitol, in the Capitol complex, on the plaza. So if you want to talk about the issue, it is not a close call. If you want to talk about what happened in the previous Congress and whether Congress can subpoena members of Congress to testify before a committee, especially when that committee has falsified and fabricated evidence, to its eternal shame, then you can talk about those other issues. And I would if I were you, because you certainly cannot meet the simple proposition that is before us now.
Would the
And you
gentleman
certainly
yield?
cannot deny the duty of this committee to respond to that brazen defiance.
Would the gentleman yield?
I will.
And I promise I'll yield back to you down the road. But the point I would just make here is that the difference between Hunter Biden and, as you mentioned, Navarro and Bannon, is that Navarro and Bannon totally stonewalled Congress. They didn't produce any documents. They didn't offer to testify in any way, and they didn't provide any testimony of any kind. By contrast here,
Let me take my time back because I've only got another 20 seconds. And I don't want to just leave and we'll come back to it and have further colloquy if you like. And I appreciate the gentleman from Maryland's collegial interaction. I think that is a distinction without a difference. I don't think, in fact, I think it makes it worse that Hunter Biden goes to media and declares and decides how he will testify to Congress. He will come to a public meeting, but he will not do what Congress has commanded by a lawful subpoena. I don't think it's a distinction that favors him. I think it's one that requires us to act. And my time's expired.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? The gentlelady from Washington is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I appreciate the passion from my friend across the aisle and the outrage. I think we're all outraged about many things. But if we're going to talk about outrageous things that have happened or things that have never happened, let's talk about the fact that President Trump incited an erection. And maybe that too.
Yeah, you could talk about that too, I guess.
Maybe we should talk about that too. The president incited an insurrection. Maybe we should talk about the fact that the former president was impeached twice. Maybe we should talk about the fact that the former president was convicted on 91 felony counts. Maybe we should talk about the fact that the former president was charged with interfering with our elections. Maybe we should talk about the fact that most, if not all, of the members of this committee, certainly leaders in the House, have continued to support and endorse a person who has literally talked about being a dictator from day one. So, Mr. Chairman, I believe this markup is an unbelievable waste of time. My Republican colleagues have been investigating Hunter Biden for years. My colleague, Mr. Ivey, just gave very important statements about why this is a different case than others that have been cited. There's been no indication whatsoever that any of his activities are connected to the president. They have turned up nothing. So why are we really here today? It is another distraction from the fact that, in the words of one of my colleagues on the other side, in this committee, by the way, said on the floor of the House, this Republican-controlled do-nothing Congress has not delivered one thing that Republicans can go home and say that they delivered to their constituents. In fact, this Congress is on track to be one of the most unproductive in modern history. This Republican-led House has only passed 27 bills that became law in spite of holding 724 votes. We still have no reauthorization of the Farm Bill, no bringing to the floor of a bipartisan bill that we passed in this committee around surveillance reform. We are on the verge of a government shutdown, and you just compare that to 2022, when Democrats controlled the House with a razor-thin majority. We held 549 votes, and 248 bills were signed into law. Now, none of this inaction stops my Republican colleagues from celebrating all the funding for infrastructure and jobs that Democrats passed without a single Republican vote. Not a single Republican voted for the Inflation Reduction Act, and yet there are many that go home to their constituents and keep crowing about how they're bringing money home from bills that they never voted for. But aside from claiming the work of Democrats, Republicans have no achievements to run on. And the American people should make no mistake that this hearing is pure political distraction. My colleagues would have you forget that under the Biden administration, 2.7 million jobs were created just last year, more than any year under the previous administration. That is a total of 14.3 million jobs created under President Joe Biden. My colleagues would have you forget that starting this month, more Americans with diabetes will finally see sharp decreases in insulin prices. Thanks to President Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, people on Medicare now pay no more than $35 a month for insulin prescriptions. That is money in people's pockets at home. And these efforts put pressure on drug makers to lower their prices for people not on Medicare as well. House Democrats also passed and President Biden signed into law, making historic investments to lower prescription drug prices. We extended health care coverage to millions, health care that Republicans are just trying to take away, acted on climate change, spurred American chips manufacturing, all while creating millions of jobs, and finally starting to ensure that the wealthy pay their fair share in taxes. And that's not to mention that we as House Democrats used our gavels to pass the Women's Health Protection Act to protect the right to decide whether or not to have an abortion. We passed landmark legislation to protect voting rights, to protect the civil rights of LGBTQ Americans, common sense gun safety reforms, legislation to provide a roadmap to citizenship to dreamers and farm workers, bills that provided an increase to the federal minimum wage and protecting the right to collective bargaining, all with the slim margins that Republicans now blame for gridlock. What we did the last two Congresses is what real leadership looks like. We didn't waste months of staff time and taxpayer resources chasing empty investigations to score cheap political points. Reject this bad faith resolution, and let's focus on things that actually deliver for the American people. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Bender, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, we're going to dig through the law, we're going to dig through the statutes, we're going to dig through the rules, and it's important. But I want to talk about what the man on the street, the man and woman on the street really sees here. And it's called rules for thee, but not for me. Democrat leaders in their desperate attempt for power continue to rewrite the rules in an effort to maintain that power. They're manipulating the courts to keep a political opponent off the presidential ballot. They disregard democracy by all but canceling their own primary process to make sure that they coronate President Biden. Democrats on TV openly endorse the chaos on the border, claiming illegal immigration is a way to help them with future redistricting. That's what it's really about. A party that is desperate for power. Leaders that are desperate for power can never be trusted with it. And I pray that they don't get it, because it will rip apart the fabric of this country. The pattern we see here paints a clear picture, and it's what people on the street see. Democrat leaders believe they are better than all of us, better than everyone else. And there's no clearer example than Hunter Biden, a man who's paraded around the world with our adversaries, a man who cheats on taxes to the tune of millions of dollars, a man who spends that tax money on escorts, drugs, alcohol, and luxury hotels, a man who illegally obtains a gun and then illegally disposes of said gun and was going to get off with hardly a slap on the wrist. Any other American wouldn't receive that type of justice. A deal that would have cleared him of all illegal acts. Unbelievable. We had an honest judge who never saw anything like that, and she couldn't even do it for the president or the vice president. The corruption is so blatant, it's hard to believe when you say it out loud. The truth is, Hunter Biden's a bad guy. And his corruption goes all the way to the top, all the way to the president. And he needs to be held accountable. As for members of this very committee that have gone out of their way, a particular member, to help orchestrate the criminal act of defying a congressional subpoena, and let me address that. This is a standing committee of the United States House of Representatives. It isn't a select partisan hack committee set up by the former speaker that didn't hear anything from the other side of the aisle. Totally different. You can't relate one to the other. And of course, Mr. Jordan was willing to go, would have gone, but just wanted an outline of what the issues were really going to be, never received that. And the reason they didn't hold him in contempt, the reason that they didn't give him the information that they needed, because they knew they were on faulty ground. They knew that they were a partisan hack committee. They knew they didn't want to hear the facts. They knew they didn't want to have the truth. We have the other side of the aisle here. They can challenge. They can have a colloquy. They can go into debate. That didn't exist on that other committee. The purpose of that committee was to hang one individual. But when you think the rule of law is for thee and not for me, Hunter Biden and my colleague from California, those sanctions, they're unsurprising. Americans see the corruption. They feel it. They want Democratic leaders and powerful, rich people to be treated like everybody else. The construction worker down the street sees it. The parents who want to speak out at a school board meeting see it. Traditional Catholics who want to worship their Catholicism and the government tries to spy on them sees it. The millions of Americans that were illegally surveyed by FISA, they see it. And if this committee doesn't unanimously today hold Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress, Democrat leaders will once again show the world their blatant disregard for the rules of this country and the core values that should bind all of us. Justice for thee, but not for me. The rules for thee, but not for me. The powerful, the rich, the Democrat leaders in control. It doesn't apply to them. It only applies to the people they want to get. God help us. I pray for justice and integrity to prevail today. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to make a number of points. Number one, it was Merrick Garland, the Democratic Attorney General of the United States, who appointed the special prosecutor who is prosecuting Hunter Biden. So no one can say that we're letting Hunter Biden off. We appointed, or the Justice Department appointed under Democratic auspices, a special prosecutor. Number one. Number two, we have never held someone in contempt who is willing to come and testify in public before a committee. The Republican majority on this committee has held 90 private interviews. One has been made public. Selective and misleading quotes have been released from the other 89. Selective and misleading. And they won't make the transcript of the entire interview public because that would show how selective and misleading the quotes are. Number three, let's talk about the real danger faced by this country. 3 years ago, an insurrection was launched against the lawful authority of this country, an insurrection designed to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, the first, in effect, revolution against this country since the Civil War. And it was mounted by Donald Trump. And people were hurt and killed in that attempted revolution, which is what it was. But now we seem to have forgotten it. Or at least the Republicans seem to have forgotten it. And don't forget the testimony right after the president was certified that night. The next day or two, the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, the Republican Minority Leader of the House, Kevin McCarthy, both got up and said that Donald Trump was responsible for what had happened. McConnell said he should be prosecuted. He is being prosecuted. Republicans say that this is a weaponization of the Department of Justice. What nerve? A former president is being prosecuted for crimes committed in front of the entire nation. Everybody saw it. This president or former president says that if he is reelected, he wants to be a dictator. He wants to weaponize the Justice Department to prosecute his opponents. He says so. He says he wants to do the things that Republicans are falsely accusing the current Justice Department of doing. He says he wants retribution. I am your retribution. He says he wants the death penalty against the former chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. That is what's really going on in this country. And here we have this committee with a farcical motion to hold Hunter Biden in contempt, even though, as I said, Hunter Biden is willing to testify in front of the committee. No committee has ever held someone in contempt who is willing to testify and says so on any date that the chairman wishes. The hypocrisy here is, I would say it's beyond belief, except the Republicans have shown it repeatedly in this session. If they hadn't, it would be beyond belief. It's unforgivable. It's subversive of freedom in this country. It's subversive of the notion of Republican with a small r government. And the Republicans ought to be ashamed of themselves. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My fellow Americans, Happy New Year. But I've got some sad news. Despite what some would want you to believe, this hearing is not about Hunter Biden, a man who is a private citizen, never before worked for the federal government, much less the executive branch. This hearing, ladies and gentlemen, is about Joe Biden. Joe Biden is president, and MAGA Republicans on this committee still cannot bring themselves to accept the truth that Trump lost the election. So they've made it their single-minded mission to do everything they can to get Donald Trump reelected. Their game plan is to impeach Joe Biden and make him a one-term president. And despite a year of an exhaustive joint investigation by this committee and the MAGA House Oversight Committee into Hunter Biden's laptop and Hunter's $1,300 a month highly suspicious car note reimbursements to his dad, House Republicans have come up empty on their crusade to impeach Joe Biden. Perhaps this is what motivated my good friend and fellow Judiciary Committee member Chip Roy to take to the House floor in a fit of frustration and say, quote, "One thing, I want my Republican colleagues to give me one thing, one, that I can go campaign on and say we did. Anybody sitting in the complex, if you want to come down to the floor and come explain to me one meaningful, significant thing the Republican majority has done," and he proceeded from there. I'll end that quote right there. But Speaker Johnson is like-minded, saying that impeaching President Biden is a, quote, political imperative, end quote. Speaker Johnson went on to say that, quote, people are getting anxious and they're getting restless and they just want somebody to be impeached, end quote. So here we are with government funding deadlines to keep the government open, rapidly approaching, with our allies in Ukraine requiring urgent assistance, among a host of other topics requiring congressional action. Republicans are kicking off the new year not by passing legislation that would better the lives of the American people. Instead, MAGA Republicans are kicking off the new year by going after Hunter Biden for being in violation of a subpoena to appear at a secret, almost clandestine deposition, excluding the public and the media, after Hunter had offered to come before this committee to answer any and all MAGA questions in a public hearing. And what's so ironic is that Chairman Jordan wants to hold a man in contempt who has offered to appear when the chairman has been in complete violation of his own duly issued House committee subpoena for the last 608 days. Sadly, legislating is secondary to the MAGA public political agenda of impeaching President Biden. In fact, last year, the MAGA-led House passed only 27 bills. This House held 724 votes, but we couldn't even make 30 laws. That is less lawmaking than any other Congress in the last decade. In fact, last year, MAGA Republicans passed fewer bills than any other Congress since the Great Depression. It's embarrassing and it's shameful, especially when you consider that MAGA Republicans expended 5 weeks last year to elect 2 House speakers, wasting a grand total of 19 speaker votes. It was indeed a painful spectacle. And the dysfunction and gridlock continue into 2024 with only 9 days left before the government runs out of money. The voters did not send us to Washington to pave the way for the re-election of Donald Trump. They sent us to Washington to pass laws that make life better for them. Let's start doing real work on behalf of the American people rather than wasting time catering to Donald Trump. And with that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Moran, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Chairman, there is really a narrow question presented here today before this committee, and that is, should Hunter Biden be held in contempt of Congress for his failure or refusal to comply with a valid subpoena for deposition? That's it. That's the narrow question that's before this body today. That's the narrow question that's ultimately going to be presented to the whole body of Congress. And this matter is really about a procedural adherence to the law, more so than it is about the underlying substantive issues that we want to talk about. We have a valid and lawful and enforceable subpoena that has been issued to Hunter Biden for a deposition. It regarded a legislative purpose, and that proper subpoena must be complied with. There's no discretion there on behalf of the recipient of that subpoena to say when and how he wants to do it. It is by force of law that he must comply with the subpoena. That's point number one. I have 2 further points. Secondly, this is a matter regarding the acts and omissions of Hunter Biden, not others. I note that many of my colleagues on the other side want to talk about other people and other issues and other things that are irrelevant to this proceeding today. The proceeding, again, is a narrow question about Hunter Biden's acts and omissions as it relates to the subpoena that was issued to him for a deposition. That's it. Responsibility and accountability for decisions has to be individualized in this particular instance. When I was home over the break, I had lots of opportunity to deal with my 2 young children, my 6 and my 8-year-old. And oftentimes when I deal with them, what I find is when they're having an issue, I go to one and I say, why did you do this? And he wants to point at his sister and say, well, she did this. He wants to deflect and talk about his sister's action. I have to respond and remind him, no, let's talk about your responsibility for your own decisions and the accountability that you're going to have for the decisions that you're making. That's what I feel like when I'm here today, listening to some of the arguments on the other side. They want to deflect and say, oh, but let's look at somebody else and something else that happened years ago. Well, no, the narrow question is, what did Hunter Biden do or not do in response to the subpoena for testimony and deposition? That's the narrow question here today. The decisions of Hunter Biden have to have consequences. And that leads me to point number 3, because if this body fails or refuses to hold Hunter Biden in contempt of Congress, future citizens will know that such subpoenas are meaningless. Whether or not they come from a democratically controlled Judiciary Committee or a Republican controlled Judiciary Committee, they're meaningless. And in that instance, the legislative branch would be without power to effectively compel attendance. We do this over and over again as the Article I branch of government. We cede power to somebody else. We don't want to enforce it when it's tough. We have to hold ourselves accountable. And in this instance, we have to hold a private citizen accountable when they do not respond to a properly and validly issued subpoena. If we do not do that, then for years to come, other people will say, but Hunter Biden didn't show up. Why should I show up? There will be no consequences. I don't need to do this. Or maybe it's just that because Hunter Biden's daddy is the president, that's the issue, that he knows he's going to get coverage. It's clear to me that Hunter Biden believes he is above the law. This Judiciary Committee today cannot let it go. We have an obligation and a duty to hold this citizen responsible and accountable for his failure or refusal to respond to a valid subpoena for a deposition. Not a hearing before this committee, but a deposition. Any other American under subpoena would be required to attend, and any other American would not get the protection that Hunter Biden is getting in this instance. We must act strongly and stand firm, not just for Republican issuances of subpoenas, but for Democratic issuance of subpoenas in years to come, because one of these days the tables are going to be turned, and we must be consistent in the application of our law. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Schiff, if you'd yield for a question first, I guess we're still on your amendment.
No.
No? Was that
they-
tabled or the table to appeal the motion to?
They
table?
buried the motion to hold Mr. Jordan in contempt with one procedural motion, but that wasn't enough to hide it from the public, so they buried the procedural motion in another procedural motion, which was buried in a motion to appeal the ruling of the chair, which was tabled, and long and the short of it is they didn't want to discuss it, and they moved to a procedural mechanism where they could stop the debate.
Well, the thing is that what they were, problem was they said that the subpoena to Mr. Jordan was in the last Congress, and therefore it's been, statute of limitations has run. But what it really is about chutzpah, which in English, of course, is hypocrisy. But it's both chutzpah and hypocrisy, that Mr. Jordan would have to ask that a subpoena failure to comply be cited for contempt when he did the same thing. That chutzpah has no statute of limitations. Would you entertain another amendment that finds him guilty of chutzpah?
I would certainly be willing to modify my motion to simply hold him in contempt and not Hunter Biden, if that were desired by the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Schiff. Just some things have been said today.
I don't think that is desired by the committee.
Some things have been said today that I'd like to. Mr. Van Drew said that the January 6th committee just wanted to hang one person. No, it was hang Mike Pence. That's what they said on January 6th, not hang somebody else, individual one. And so I think he got confused in who was to be hung. And Ms. Jayapal did a pretty good job of talking about what they failed to do. But you forgot today is an historic day. Today is a day like none other in the history of the Congress of the United States of America. The Republicans are getting us a new pin. Today we're getting a new pin. Never before have we had two pins in one Congress. This is the two-pin Congress. They didn't like green.
Will the gentleman yield as to the pin?
No, sir. Maybe it's the wicked that they don't like the connection with the play, which was green, and they gave green a good name. We're getting a new pin. We're getting a new pin. But the fact is, this is not about Hunter Biden. This is not about subpoenas. This is about Joe Biden, and it's about this committee and much of the Republican Congress trying to reelect Donald Trump, who has 91 indictments, 91 sightings and indictments, 2 impeachments, God knows how many lies, and they want to help get him back in power, who he says he'll be the dictator just on day one. And on day one, of course, what he'll do is he'll declare a national emergency and a national situation where he'll empower the military and to come under his command to go after people and arrest people and to do things that have never been done in America before. That will be a dictatorship that he will announce on day one and will continue through history. But he's not going to be elected because the American people are not capable or willing to be conned by the number one con man that this nation has ever known. He has conned many of his supporters. And I read on January 6th on responses to emails or to social media sightings that that group believes that it was Antifa and the FBI that led the assault on January 6th. They had masks on to make them appear to be MAGA. I guess the Antifa and the, which is not a Democratic group, it's some kind of group out there, Antifa, they're liberal, they're not Democrat. And that they and the FBI got involved in the insurrection and urged it on and were responsible for it, and it was all a false flag. And these people believe it. They have bought one of the biggest lies ever propounded or promoted by an American president. And the president continues to do it, to talk about the election. And there were people in this Congress who supported overturning the election. I think 140 people on the Republican side voted to not accept the Electoral College votes of Arizona and or Pennsylvania. It's scary what's happened, and this is part of it. This is a continuation of rewriting history and making people out there who apparently didn't go to the colleges that have the presidents that Ms. Stefanik is trying to remove. Anyway, this is chutzpah, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Indiana, Ms. Sparks, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to make a couple of brief remarks on just some of the issues that were brought up from other side, and then kind of get to the subject. No, honestly, I agree. Last Congress, the other side passed a lot of very bad bills. I don't think quantity of bills is a good legislation, and actually wasted a lot of money. And unfortunately, they had control on all houses and presidency and were able to do a lot of bad legislation and not dealing with real issues affecting Americans, crushing debt, inflation, and the spending, and and what's happening in our border is very destructive for our country. And they don't want to do, and they don't even want to find bipartisan agreement on these issues, this Congress, which is very sad for me to see. I know there is a lot of discussions about, January 6th, and I've been in the chamber January 6th, and I'll tell you something, we call this insurrection. I'll have to tell you, if the people that show up there wanted to do it, they would have succeeded, but they didn't show up for that reason. It was people that were upset because the quality of people came there. They were mad because we are not governing for the people. And that's unfortunately what was very strange to me, that Speaker Pelosi didn't have a security. Speaker Pelosi insisted for us to stay in the chamber. I personally demanded to leave that chamber. So a lot of things, the other side dropped the ball. And it was very unfortunate for me to see that. So I think this is beyond the subject of this matter, but we need to stop, accusing people that disagree with the government that been very corrupt and oppressive, to actually come here and, express peacefully their dissatisfaction. And there are always some bad players, and who knows who they are, but we don't call all people insurrectionists. This is just un-American to do it. And I'm sick and tired of the other side constantly doing it, because I knew a lot of people that were there in the crowd, and they're good Americans, patriotic, that love this country. But go further, I know that maybe, Chairman Issa said it might be a waste of time, and Hunter Biden is going to invoke the Fifth Amendment. But you know what? What he's doing right now, beyond that, it is a blatant disregard of congressional subpoena. That's how he does. He actually dares enough. No other American would show up actually in the face, of Congress and defy and say, I'm going to decide how things are going to happen. This is just disrespectful. Only someone who thinks a little too much of himself would go actually do something. People might disagree, fighting in the courts, but not in the face. As Representative Bishop said, that is actually extremely disrespectful to this institution to do what he is doing. And if we look at the matter of the fact, we can debate and try, to get attention to other issues and deliberate. But ultimately, I think that should be, and Representative Moran said that is setting up a very bad precedent. If the other side decide, that somebody can just act like that with the Congress, they might shoot themselves in the foot, because next Congress, there could be something different, and they will be on the other side, because we're setting up a precedent, but somebody's going to decide if they're going to comply or not of the deposition subpoena. And I don't think this institution, should allow that happen. If, this is a very serious impeachment inquiry, if Hunter Biden want to explain what's happened, he has a chance to come. And it's not like in a deposition, you have just one side. You have both sides, equal amount of time. Everything can be questioned. So it's a very bipartisan process, but not a 5-minute presentation that will just go until he do just here for 5 minutes talking points with his lawyers. And it's not going to really get to the subject matter, because subject matter at stake, it's extremely serious. I think we should start taking actually impeachment inquiries and proceedings much more seriously than the other side did. It's not a politics, it's not a joke. We're a serious institution, and I do not think people think that way here now. And it's unfortunately what we have became. We became a circus, entertainment, and talking points, and not really looking at issues seriously. It's sad for me to see, and I think this is a reflection, on where we are heading as a republic, and it's a sad reality. But we have to decide, are we going to be adults in the room and start looking at the issues, or we're just going to do presentations here? So I think if we go to the narrow matter of the discussion, do we allow anyone to defy the congressional subpoena? And the other sides will have to make a decision how they're going to vote for that. But they might regret that they're doing politics right now. So I hope they will rethink this and support in this resolution. So I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff is recognized. Then we'll go to Mr. Rapp.
Mr. Chairman, once again, we hear an effort to reinvent January 6th, this time as people expressing peacefully their disagreements with the government. January 6th was not a peaceful expression of differences with the government. It was a massive, violent attack on the Capitol with the object of overturning a free and fair election. Mr. Jordan cut off debate on my amendment to hold him in contempt, so we couldn't discuss what his role was, why he was subpoenaed, and whether he should be held to the same standard as a private citizen. And while he said quite erroneously that he was not required to testify, either because he took issue with the object of the investigation or because the speech and debate clause, as Representative Lofgren pointed out, that does not apply to subpoenaing a member of this body. Let's remember who did step forward, and let's ask ourselves not why he was compelled and refused, but why he didn't volunteer to come forward, why he was unwilling to share his information, why it was even necessary to subpoena him. After all, so many others did their constitutional duty. Republican Speaker in Arizona, Rusty Bowers, talked about how he was compelled by his oath, by his faith, by the Constitution, to do his constitutional duty, to refuse the former president's entreaties to overturn the election. And he showed his devotion to our country and the Constitution by coming and testifying. Jim Jordan would not. Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, did his constitutional duty both to protect the vote in Georgia, to ignore the former president's demands that he find 11,780 votes that didn't exist, but also to come and testify, to share with the country what he knew, but not Jim Jordan. Cassidy Hutchinson, a staff member at the White House, showed extraordinary courage to come forward, showed her devotion to her country and Constitution, and came forward and testified, but not Jim Jordan. Capitol police officers who were beaten and gouged that day, they came forward and testified, but not Jim Jordan. White House counsel, Republican White House counsel came forward and testified, but not Jim Jordan. Unless we forget why the committee wanted Jim Jordan, let's look at our referral to the Ethics Committee over his failure to come forward for guide as to why we wanted his testimony. Representative Jordan was a significant player in President Trump's efforts, we wrote. He participated in numerous post-election meetings in which senior White House officials, Rudy Giuliani and others, discussed strategies for challenging the election. Chief among them claims that the election had been tainted by fraud. On January 2nd, 2021, Representative Jordan led a conference call in which he, President Trump, and other members of Congress discussed strategies for delaying the January 6th joint session. During that call, the group also discussed issuing social media posts encouraging President Trump's supporters to march to the Capitol on January 6th. An hour and a half later, President Trump and Representative Jordan spoke by phone for 18 minutes. Yes, we wanted him to come testify about what he discussed with President Trump for 18 minutes. And no, Jim Jordan has never told this body, why he was unwilling to tell the country about that conversation in the run-up to a violent attack on the U.S. Capitol. Or why he spoke with White House staff about, as we wrote, the prospect of presidential pardons from members of Congress. He was unwilling to say why he thought pardons from members of Congress might be necessary. And today, he's unwilling to tell us why there should be a different standard for a member of Congress who is subpoenaed than for a private citizen, and why the standard for a private citizen should be so much higher. My colleagues on the other side of the aisle say that's not a germane question. We love to hide behind germaneness when we really don't want to answer the root of the matter. And the root of the matter is, why is Hunter Biden's failure to appear worthy of a criminal contempt, but the chairman of the Judiciary Committee's unwillingness to comply with a congressional subpoena gets nothing more than a shrug? That's really the question before this committee today. And so far, there is no answer. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
I love following my colleagues from California because it gives me so many more things to talk about. You know, Congressman Schiff, you and I came into Congress together almost 24 years ago. We've seen a lot. We've seen a lot in this committee. But whenever I'm in a markup and one side wants to talk about something that's not on the table and the other side says, well, why don't we talk about what's on the table? The whole thing gets lost. Well, I want to bring it back to what is really at stake here. This committee has subpoenaed an individual in which there is a substantial amount of information related to the wrongdoing of not just himself, but potentially the President of the United States, the then Vice President of the United States. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an investigation of the then Vice President of the United States and his son, who had special access, who flew on Air Force Two, who today had the committee room next to us swept so he could come in and make a little staged appearance. We're not dealing with a private individual, as my colleague from California said. He's not a private individual. He is the son of the president. He is a man who has flown around the world using his last name being his father's last name, to make millions of dollars, much of which he hid from the IRS and didn't pay his taxes on. That's who we're asking to come in a private session, not a staged public event, and answer questions if he will. As a gentlelady from Indiana said, Ms. Sparks, I said he might or probably would take the fifth. He hasn't said he'd take the fifth. That would be an assertion that his people could make, and that the chairman would look at that. What he has done is simply thumbed his nose at the American people and at this body. It's that simple. It has nothing to do with what went on in the last Congress. It has nothing to do with what went on years ago in the election of President Biden. And yet one side would have you hear about Jim Jordan not showing up for a committee that he sent letters back to telling him why he needed to know things and he wanted to negotiate his appearance, which is not uncommon for any witness, particularly a member of Congress, asked about his private conversations between him and the President of the United States. We all know the President of the United States has an absolute right to ask for and receive information in confidence. And we have been told for years on both sides of the aisle that we do not have access to that correspondence related to decision-making of a president. And yet we're acting like they're the equivalent of somebody who has committed crimes, Hunter Biden, who has used his position as the son of the president to fly to China, make business deals, and then fly home with daddy on Air Force Two. We are clearly looking at somebody who has done wrong, has used his family name to do wrong. But more importantly, we are looking at whether or not there was a connection in funds flowing to the president and or the president, then vice president, taking action as a result of funds flowing to he or other family members. It's that simple. We are doing a serious investigation of real wrongdoing, and an individual who has done wrongdoing, no question about it, is refusing to come, but has the, as the congressman who's no longer here from Tennessee says, he has the chutzpah to show up in the committee room next door or use the Secret Service to do so, just as before the break, he showed up across the Capitol using Congressman Swalwell's name to get himself a place to have a staged press conference. Well, we sat in this room waiting for him to show up, all the court reporters, the chairman, the ranking members doing their job because we expected him to show up as subpoenaed for a deposition. So let's get back to the basics. This is a contempt because he has been contemptible of not just not showing up, but how he has thwarted and given us the middle finger, if you will, to the American people. And when somebody flips the bird to the American people or the United States Congress or to the power of legitimate government actions, yes, that's what referral for contempt to the federal court should be. And I insist on it. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got quite a few things to respond to. I want to start with the comment from the gentlelady from, I think it's Indiana, regarding the peaceful nonviolent protest on January 6th. The irony of that for me is, you know, I grew up during the civil rights movement. Dr. King's birthday is one that we celebrate on Monday. And I gotta say that if she wants to see an example of a peaceful nonviolent process or protest, I hope she'll, you know, watch Montgomery to Memphis or take a look at the civil rights movement, because that's what a nonviolent protest looks like. Dr. King didn't show up with bear spray. He didn't show up with any kind of weapons. He didn't break into any kind of locked buildings. They didn't do anything like that. If there was any kind of violence during those protests, it was perpetrated by the police, Bull Connor and the like. Next, I'd like to say this. The Republicans keep saying, you know, we want to try and get this information. It's important. President Biden is, you know, under investigation, blah, blah, blah. Here's the problem with that argument. You could have gotten it right there at the table. In fact, Mr. Issa just referenced the meeting. We were sitting, I think it was the next room, waiting for Hunter Biden to show up. Well, A, that's incorrect because he said he wasn't coming for the deposition. But if they decided, you know what, we can do a hearing right now. They had the court reporter there. We're in a hearing room. Let's just, the members just come up to the dais and give them a chance to speak. We could have done it right then. In fact, we could do it today if you guys would just move off of this hardline position about it's got to be a deposition. It can't be public testimony. We could do it now. We could do it now. So the problem when you start talking about contempt, by the way, this is criminal contempt. This is, you're saying that he's got the intent to deny this committee information that it's seeking. And all the cases you cite in your report go to that point. But he's not denying the information. In fact, in contrast to some of the other folks we talked about, Navarro and Bannon and the like, they stonewalled it. He has not. He has not. And the last point I'll make, and I'll give you some time if I can, with respect to the chairman's responses with respect to the select committee subpoena. And I think it's a fair point that the congressman from California made. You know, Mr. Chairman, you could have testified if you wanted. In fact, if you'd met the Hunter Biden standard, you could have publicly testified, just like he's offered to do. And by the way, it's not too late. You know, if you want to make that happen, we can do that, I'm sure. But the other point I want to make is this. One of the things the chairman did in sending a letter back to the select committee was he put conditions on him coming to testify, conditions that he would never permit witnesses now to assert. For example, he requested material from the select committee including all materials referencing him in the select committee's possession, and all internal legal analysis related to the constitutionality of the members' subpoenas. If the members, I don't even know how many compliance hearings we've had with respect to Department of Justice, but if they'd made that assertion, you would have to peel these guys off the ceiling. And by the way, we've got members demanding DOJ line employees and other line employees at the government level, having them come in to testify, which is unprecedented, by the way, especially in the middle of a criminal investigation. You're bringing line prosecutors in here and compelling them to testify, or even asking them to testify in the middle of a criminal investigation, and they're complying with you. By the way, I've told them I disagree with that position. I think they should just outright say no, because that's what you did, that's what the Republicans did, and that's what the previous executive branch administrations have done. They've asserted privileges that the Biden administration has not. And yet here we are. You're going after, and he's not a public figure, not a public official, by the way. Hunter Biden's a private citizen, which distinguishes him from all the executive branch cases that are referenced in your report. He's a different person. He's offered to come in and testify. He's a private citizen who does it and doesn't have to do it. And there's absolutely no reason we should hold him in criminal contempt. With that, I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. And just to distinguish my California colleague's argument that Jim Jordan didn't have to appear because there's some executive privilege covering his conversations with Donald Trump. Much as I respect my colleague legally, that's nonsense. Executive privilege applies within the executive. A president can't say to a member of Congress, you can't describe my conversation that I had with you. And in fact, even within the executive, we had the testimony of White House counsel and other close advisors of the president's have been testifying before the grand jury because the courts have rejected that argument where the president was engaged in potential criminality.
Gentleman from
I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Virginia is recognized for 5 minutes. Would the gentleman yield for just a second?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Just in response to Mr. Ivey, the reason I sent the 11-page letter to Mr. Thompson that I'm haven't received a response from was because asking for the reasoning and the analysis on the subpoena was because he had said so. He said, we're studying the matter. We're not sure we can do it. There was doubt there. So we said, well, provide us what now, because now you've changed your position. You've issued the subpoena. So we just asked for that. We've yet to receive that. But that's why we did it, because the chairman actually said that.
Would the gentleman
yield
yield
to the gentleman from
the gentleman
Virginia?
yield?
It's his gentleman from Virginia's time.
I thank the chairman, and that was going to be my first request, is that your letter of June 9th be inserted for the record.
Without objections, it'd be entered in.
And let's run down that timeline, because you were first approached in late 2021 about appearing before the January 6th committee. You responded on January 9th, 2022, stating that you had no relevant information would assist, but wrote that any information you could provide would relate to performance of official duties. May 12th, Chairman Thompson subpoenaed you. May 25th, you requested information and materials from the committee. May 31st, Chairman Thompson widened the scope of information sought. June 9th, you responded again. So the last communication was you responding, trying to negotiate the appearance before the committee. Mr. Ivey has been an attorney in private practice. I've been an attorney in private practice, representing clients in receipt of subpoenas, and also a prosecutor actually issuing subpoenas. And there's a thing called reasonable accommodation, which I know my friend is familiar with, where you try to reach an agreement about how that person will comply with the subpoena. And I'm not going to yield at this point, but I will say that this is very different than what we've seen from Mr. Biden. And Mr. Ivey sits on the subcommittee that I chair, Responsiveness and Accountability to Oversight. We've been charged with trying to encourage responsiveness instead of stonewalling to consistently requests for information from this committee being ignored by this administration. So the idea that somehow the son of the president is doing something that is different than the administration is actually not that unusual. But what we have here is continued stonewalling by Mr. Biden. On December 7th, We issued, the committees issued a joint deposition notice for him to appear on December 13th, and he didn't appear for his deposition. The last communication was actually not from Mr. Biden asking for more information. Mr. Lowell did send a letter on December 6th, but that the committee actually responded that day, the same day, reiterating that the subpoenas do not provide Mr. Biden a choice to make, and rather the subpoenas compel him to appear for a deposition. And let's talk about which committees we're talking about here. This is, again, a standing committee of the House of Representatives, the Judiciary Committee, as opposed to the January 6th committee, which even the chairman himself actually was quoted as saying, I think there are some questions as to whether we have the authority to subpoena colleagues. We're looking at it. And they never actually arrived at a conclusion as to whether that was allowable under the rules, and challenged by many of my colleagues. So the chairman of this committee never declined to testify, whereas Mr. Biden seems to want to violate all norms and procedures of proper subpoena procedure and compliance and reasonable accommodation, and dictate to this committee the time and place and manner in which he will appear. Instead of making appearances down the hall at oversight committee hearings to thumb his nose, instead of somehow cooperating with members of the minority to arrange for press conferences on Capitol grounds. Can you imagine if Mr. Bobulinski had done that? What the minority would do if those who January 6th were seeking testimony from and who did not comply actually held press conferences on the Capitol grounds or came to adjoining committees to sit and smile at the members of the committee while they tried to get information. Heads would explode on that side of the aisle. So with that, I urge my colleagues to support this motion. It is time to get compliance with this committee's responsibility for oversight, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Liu, is recognized.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Last term, when Democrats were in control, we passed a number of laws to move the American family forward. We passed the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act that created a lot of good paying jobs. We passed the Bipartisan PACT Act that helped our nation's veterans. We passed the Bipartisan Chips and Science Act that brought chip manufacturing back to the United States and created even more good paying jobs. This term, under Republican control, what do we have? We have impeachments and expulsions and contempt proceedings because Republicans have no agenda. Under Democrats, we created a record number of jobs last year. We had GDP growth above expectations, unemployment at a 50-year low, and the stock market reaching record highs. And what are we doing here this week? Not one, but two hearings under Republican control on Hunter Biden. I can guarantee you no American family over the holidays was sitting around the kitchen table thinking, gosh, that Hunter Biden, he's willing to testify publicly under oath in front of Congress, but he won't do a closed-door deposition. We really got to hold him in contempt. No American family was thinking that. None of this helps move the American family forward. And the reason we have not one but two committee hearings doing this today is because the Republicans have no agenda. We are 9 days away from a government shutdown. Are we doing a single appropriations hearing on the floor this week? No. Instead, what we got this year was we had the Republicans bring us to the brink of not one, not two, but now three potential government shutdowns. We had a Republican majority bring us to the brink of a catastrophic default on our nation's debts. And we had a Republican majority taking out their own speaker. We have chaos on the other side, and because they can't agree on anything, they're doing these stupid proceedings. And it's particularly stupid because Hunter Biden showed up today to testify publicly under oath. Why are the Republicans scared to let him testify publicly? What are Republicans hiding from American people? What don't they want Hunter Biden to say publicly? Ask yourself that question. And let me make one more point. None of this is going to matter because Hunter Biden substantially complied with the subpoena. The subpoena said, we want your testimony. He said, okay, I will come to you at a time and place that you choose. I just won't do a closed door deposition, but I'll come to a time and place here in this committee room and testify publicly under oath. That is substantial compliance. That means the Department of Justice is never going to enforce this subpoena. So we're spending all this time wasting taxpayers' money when we should be focused instead. How do we move the American family forward? How do we lower costs, create more jobs, and increase GDP growth? That's what Democrats want to work on. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Fitzgerald, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The questions come up numerous times. Why won't he sit for a closed door deposition, which was brought up by my colleague, Mr. Bishop, earlier? I'm not sure what the issue is. Why won't he sit for a deposition? I think he's just.
Would the gentleman yield for an answer to that question?
I don't yield right now.
Mr. Fitzgerald controls the time.
I'm not sure why, but I'm sure it's the barrage of questions that, quite honestly, would probably incriminate him. My colleague, Mr. Ivey, earlier talked about being a private citizen. And the problem is that Hunter Biden has a business card, right? And I'm not sure how many business cards he has, but I think most of them would simply say the president's son, right? That's clearly what he's doing. If he's down the hallway today in oversight, willing to sit in the back row and smile at the members of Congress to defy, obviously, the subpoena, he still hasn't found a job like he was asked about by a judge much earlier in the year, last year. So it's straightforward that the president's son not only defied a legally issued subpoena, but both House and committee rules make it crystal clear, as many of my colleagues have said before, that we have subpoena authority, which was communicated on multiple occasions to the president's son and his counsel. His decision to ignore the deposition subpoenas in favor of a public hearing, it doesn't somehow absolve him from the constitutional mandated duty to comply. So there's been a lot of discussion about other items, I think, here today, but let's go back to the bottom line, and that is that he is under a subpoena by the U.S. House of Representatives to sit and comply with the subpoena. It's not a suggestion. It does not deserve special treatment. It is what it is. But more than that, his refusal to testify seems to support the notion that, he doesn't want to incriminate himself, which, I understand. Then simply take the fifth. Again, Mr. Bishop discussed this earlier. Is this simply kind of a charade in front of Congress to ultimately say, okay, I'd be willing to come in and sit? We don't know what he would say in a public hearing either. But this committee, Judiciary Committee, not only has the wherewithal, but the responsibility to take this seriously. We know through public record requests and the depositions of business associates and government officials that foreign money was received by the president's son and the Biden family. And that those payments led to favors or special treatment by the president of the United States. And that large, quote unquote, reimbursement checks were issued to President Biden shortly after that. We all know through testimony from the president's son and his business associate, Devin Archer, that President Biden was at the center of this family's business dealings. Mr. Archer put it, quote unquote, the brand. He was on speakerphone with his son approximately 20 times. He was allegedly sitting with his son when Hunter Biden pressured a Chinese energy company, and he received 10% for his troubles. It's a joke. It's on T-shirts. You board any airplane in America right now, and it says 10% for the big guy. Further, it appears that foreign nationals sought to influence public officials through their family members. This presents legal and ethical questions that need to be answered. And the president's son is afraid that a closed-door deposition may support some of these accusations. That's what's going on. I don't think anybody's being fooled by the discussion that's happening here today. So I just reiterate my support for the idea that we should continue to press to get the president's son in a deposition setting and get to the bottom of this so that the people of the United States of America understand that their president is not part of this. Unfortunately, I think he is. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Vermont, Ms. Balin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized.
Thank you. My constituents ask me all the time, what's the most difficult part of serving in Congress? And for me, it is confronting the deep cynicism. This hearing is not about transparency. It's not about accountability. Our committee has conducted 90 interviews or depositions this Congress, and to date, the chairman has released exactly one transcript. The one transcript that was released after we Democrats complained and asked him to release it to the Judiciary Committee in a hearing. The chairman won't let Hunter Biden testify publicly, and he hasn't been releasing the transcripts of interviews that have taken place. The public, as my colleague said, regular people deserve to know what this committee has been doing this Congress. I agree. The public, regular people, should see that in interview after interview, Republicans advance conspiracy theories wholly unsupported by evidence. Instead, the chairman continues to call witnesses behind closed doors, and I fear that's because the facts don't support the allegations. That the evidence would actually show that Republicans put forward claims that are baseless and false. So let's talk more about those real people, those regular people who send us here to do work on their behalf. Not only are the chairman's investigations a cynical waste of time, but they have put the lives of regular people in danger. Witnesses that have appeared before this committee have testified that House Republicans have spread dangerous conspiracy theories about them, and it has led to threats against their families and against them. Regular people, regular Americans. For instance, after Chairman Jordan posted an edited video of her on Twitter, one witness who was 9 months pregnant at the time had to get a restraining order against a man who repeatedly doxed her family. She had to disguise herself to go to prenatal visits because of the stalking and of the tens of thousands of death threats that she experienced. She ended up having to hire a private security firm that recommended that she not leave home. Witnesses who are members of law enforcement have testified that they've been doxxed, that they have gotten threats not just at work, but at their homes as well. And beyond that, witnesses have described threats to their families and to their children. They've described threatening letters being sent to their family members and having to move houses because their addresses have been posted online. Many of the 90 interviews that the committee has conducted this Congress have been with ordinary Americans, regular people who are just trying to do their jobs. Republican investigations this Congress have jeopardized the health and the safety of everyday Americans, regular people, the people who sent us here to do work on their behalf. This committee appears to be more interested in advancing conspiracy theories than in doing our jobs, serving the people we represent, those regular people. The posturing here in this committee is rooted in a deep, dangerous cynicism, a cynicism that threatens our very democracy, and it is very hard to watch. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I agree with Mr. Liu and other Democrats have spoken today that it was a tragedy that we lost many months of productive work because of the chaos created by the removal of the Speaker. But I would remind them that the Republican majority didn't remove the Speaker. Every single Democrat in the House, joined by just 8 Republicans, removed the Speaker. And under that Speaker, this House had passed landmark legislation to secure our borders, unleash American energy independence, and cut hundreds of billions of dollars of red tape. And to his argument that the economy is doing just great because of this administration, here's the one question they fear the most. Are you better off today than you were 4 years ago? Everybody knows the answer to that question in their own lives, and they will vote accordingly. And that obviously terrifies the Democrats, and it should. But all of that's irrelevant to the question before us today. The question before us today was perhaps best expressed just the other day by President Biden himself. On January 5th, the president attacked those who he said, quote, traffic in lies told for power and profit, and who are driven by grievance and grift. Well, we're here because of concern that for many years, the president has been doing exactly that through a complex family influence peddling scheme. These concerns are backed by a growing trove of documentation, emails, testimony of associates, bank records, FBI informants that paint a troubling picture of a family influence peddling operation over many years in which the central feature was access to Joe Biden, involving millions of dollars of payments to family members and perhaps to Biden himself. Now, Joe Biden clearly, unequivocally, and forcefully has maintained that he had nothing to do with that operation. He never spoke to his family about it. So what is so hard for the family member who collected all of these millions of dollars of foreign payments at the center of all of this to come here and say so? The only answer I can think of is that Mr. Biden has been telling lies for power and profit, driven by grievance and grift. I hope there's another answer that would exonerate the president. And I would think that he, above all, would want to put those suspicions to rest. If there's nothing to these suspicions, just say so. How hard is that? And if there is something to these suspicions, the Fifth Amendment rightly protects all Americans from being compelled to provide self-incriminating testimony. That might be embarrassing, but no further information can be compelled. Instead, he's chosen to thumb his nose at the lawful subpoena of Congress, a subpoena that presents no questions as far as its legitimacy or constitutionality. And that act is contemptible, and it is criminal, and it cannot be allowed to stand. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee.
Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report. Gentleman from Arizona reserves a point of order.
Amendment to the amendment in the nature of a substitute to the committee report for the resolution recommending that the House of
Amendment will be considered as read. The gentlelady is, while we're waiting to get the amendment, but the gentlelady may begin explaining her amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just returned from the Homeland Security Committee, and I again want to assert the comments of my ranking member, Mr. Chairman, and I hope that maybe in the interim, you would correct that procedural injustice, if you will. I don't believe that there's any facts basis for Secretary Marcus to be impeached, but certainly the actions should be retained of impeachment by this Judiciary Committee. I wanted that to be on the record. As I said, there's an amendment at the desk, Jackson Lee, and my amendment notes that the House Republicans are continuing to harp on an investigation that has produced no evidence of wrongdoing. Specifically, my amendment will do the following. On page 7, strike the sentence that reads, information held and known to Mr. Biden is vital to the impeachment inquiry of President Biden and the committee's ongoing efforts to craft legislative reforms to federal ethics and financial disclosure laws. On page 7, after the sentence that begins throughout 2023, insert the following. Congressional Republicans have received dozens of hours of testimony from government officials and former Hunter Biden business partners and obtained troves of documents in response to their requests. This includes more than 37,000 pages of bank records, including personal bank accounts of Biden family members and other private citizens produced by 9 different banks. In addition, the Biden-Harris administration has cooperated extensively with congressional Republicans' probe. This comes on top of evidence collected by Senators Johnson and Grassley as part of their 2020 investigation into Hunter Biden. Instead of focusing on passing meaningful legislation or act on imperatives for the American people, and mind you, coming out of Homeland Security, meaning fix the immigration system, House Republicans have instead focused solely on this investigation, an investigation that has failed to reveal any evidence of wrongdoing by President Biden. Furthermore, to the extent that the Judiciary Committee has been investigating the Department of Justice handling of the Hunter Biden criminal matter, the evidence has shown that the department has handled this investigation apolitically and in accordance with all relevant statutes, guidelines, and policies. The same statutes, guidelines, and policies that apply to all criminal matters. The evidence also shows that much of the purported evidence behind this investigation on further scrutiny is not grounded in reality. For example, when Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer falsely claimed that China, through Hunter Biden, made payments to now President Joe Biden in 2018, bank records clearly demonstrated that the payments from Hunter Biden, as we have heard, were made to Joe Biden to repay a car loan for a 2018 Ford Raptor truck. On page 7, strike the sentence beginning, the committees have collected evidence through the remainder of the section, which ends on page 11, to influence foreign business abroad and enrich the Biden family. I am glad to have been able to explain my amendment. It is unfortunate that we are here today engaging in this markup, which is nothing more than a political exercise, some would say stunt, and an embarrassing waste of time. I started out this morning by saying the highest regard that I have for this committee and the service that I've been honored to encounter. We've done many good things, and in the last 2 Congresses under Chairman Nadler, we've passed amazing legislation, even brought back to life the Violence Against Women Act that we have struggled with for over 5 years. So rather than passing legislation, indeed, to help the American people, my colleagues across the aisle are broadcasting their sole agenda for 2024, impeaching President Biden to help reelect Donald Trump. To that end, Chairman Jordan claims to have evidence suggesting that the Department of Justice impeded the investigation into Hunter Biden. I don't believe there's anything that could be further from the truth, when in fact the witnesses he has brought before the committee, including Special Counsel Weiss himself, have completely refuted this claim. Witness after witness has said that there was no political inference and that the investigation was run by the book. But rather than being honest with the American public, Chairman Jordan is hiding the transcripts of these witnesses' testimony and obscuring the truth. We can do better, Chairman. We work together on many good issues. Hope we'll continue to work together. I'd like to see us pass human trafficking, anti-human trafficking legislation. I hope one day we'll be able to do that.
Time of the gentlelady.
I would ask my colleagues to
Time has
support
expired.
the Jackson Lee amendment, Mr.
Gentlelady
Chairman.
yields
Thank you.
back. The
yield
gentleman,
back.
this gentleman from Oregon is
Thank you.
recognized
Chairman, I'll
on the amendment.
withdraw the point of order.
Point of order is withdrawn. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized on the gentlelady's amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And first, I'd like to offer to be included in the record the committee discretion to obtain witness testimony. Todd Garby, Legislative Attorney, December 22nd, 2023, Congressional Research Service.
Without objection.
Mr. Chair, I find the use of the phrase "unfortunate" by the gentlelady offering the amendment much more applicable to the activities of our current president than to the activities of this of this committee. It's unfortunate that our president has engaged in, at least on the face of things, influence, the sale of influence offered by his son, or the sale of access offered by his son. And what I think we need to be keeping in mind, and the language in her amendment clearly gives us the opportunity to call out the purpose of this hearing, which is to say, what is it and why is it that we need Hunter Biden as a witness so badly? And the answer, of course, is that the nation believes, at least polls indicate, that the sale of influence was occurring for years between Hunter Biden and his father. Now, is that true? Well, that's why we're having the inquiry to find out whether or not it's true, whether or not Joe Biden was directly involved or benefited from the corrupt practices of his son, Hunter Biden, and others. Who could be a more important witness than Hunter Biden? And then to suggest that there's nothing prompting this inquiry is ridiculous. The record contains witness and written evidence that the president has lied about key facts in foreign dealings, was the focus of multi-million-dollar influence peddling schemes, and they have benefited from this corruption through millions of dollars sent to his family, as well as more direct and possible benefits. The current allegations contain an alleged effort to sell influence or access, as well as other wrongdoing. Corruption allegations involving a president are particularly damaging for our political system. They effectively dissolve the public trust in government. Self-dealing and influence peddling and obstruction all undermine the faith that federal laws are being enforced equally. So for this amendment to be offered to suggest that there's no link between the president and this type of conduct is ridiculous. The public is often skeptical of the ability or inclination of federal agencies to investigate allegations raised in relation to a sitting president. So the assertion by ranking member that special counsel has been appointed to look into this, the public does not believe that will occur. Current polling illuminates the deep distrust by the public in this kind of effort. Roughly half of the public does not have faith that the Justice Department investigation into the Biden administration would be fair or nonpartisan. And polls further indicate half of Americans also believe President Biden broke the law in relation to his son's business activities. So again, the amendment is not well taken. One other thing, Mr. Chair, I want to mention, as an attorney who's taken dozens, if not hundreds of depositions, I understand exactly why we need a deposition and not an appearance by Mr. Hunter Biden before this committee. Look at this committee. Look how it approaches things. This is no way to get to the facts. 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, and then each time after you finally get to a point, someone on the other side rushes in to try to obfuscate and confuse the issue. That's why you do depositions, to get to the point and to have the time to do it and not be burdened by how this committee operates. And I would just say there's a huge reason to do exactly what we're doing, and that is get to the bottom of the facts that would address the years and years and millions that Hunter Biden has spent selling influence. And who would Hunter Biden sell influence about or to? Who? Well, it would have to be his father. There's no one else in his circle of friends that would warrant such investment by outside influencers. Mr. Chair, I could obviously go on, but I will just suggest that the deposition is the proper approach. His refusal to appear for a deposition and then say he would put himself at the mercy of this committee is ridiculous, and he deserves to be held in contempt. And with that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.
Mr. Chairman?
On the amendment, Mr. Ranking Member?
Yes.
The gentleman is recognized on the amendment, and then we'll go to
Thank
Steen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me begin by assuring Mr. Bentz that the Democrats on this committee would be perfectly happy to have the rules of a deposition, 45 minutes or whatever it is, an hour of interview by one party and then by the other, apply in public in this committee, so that the gentleman's objections about 5 minutes would not apply. We do not want And Mr. Biden properly does not want a private deposition because we've seen, as I said before, that the Republicans have quoted improperly and from the private remarks and have distorted what they said by quoting half a sentence here and half a sentence there. This amendment notes that House Republicans are continuing to harp on an investigation. And let me just say one other thing. The fact that half of Americans may believe one thing or another proves nothing other than the effectiveness of propaganda by one party or the other. It has nothing to do with the truth of the matter. This amendment notes that House Republicans are continuing to harp on an investigation that has produced no evidence of wrongdoing. Despite more than 37,000 pages of documents the majority obtained, and despite interviewing more than a dozen witnesses, Chairman Jordan and committee Republicans have yet to produce a single shred of evidence that suggesting that President Biden engaged in any wrongdoing whatsoever. In particular, the congressional Republicans have received tens of thousands of pages of bank records, including the personal bank accounts of Biden family members and other private citizens. Republicans' claims about the president's supposed wrongdoing are not supported by the evidence. Not one witness has testified that President Biden personally benefited from Hunter Biden's business dealings. Republicans have claimed that a check from Hunter Biden to Joe Biden is somehow proof of foreign corruption. But the evidence actually shows that Hunter Biden repaid his dad for a car loan. That doesn't need to be the subject of a congressional investigation. There's also no evidence that President Biden interfered in the criminal investigation of his son. In fact, the witnesses who have been working on the investigation have all affirmed to the committee that there was no political interference. The committees have uncovered no evidence that Joe Biden profited from his son's business dealings or that he interfered in the criminal investigation of his son. No evidence whatsoever. And that's why it's one of the many reasons why this committee motion to hold Hunter Biden in contempt, given the fact that he is willing to testify and has offered to testify repeatedly, is a farce and ought to be defeated. I yield back. I yield to Ms. Jackson. I yield to Ms. Jackson Lee.
Gentleman yields. Gentleman from Texas recognized.
Let me express my appreciation to Ms. Nadler and to Congresswoman Dean. I was going to wait till after, but I'll take my time now very briefly and simply say that we've had every agency. I'm going to read in particular the work of the Treasury Department that has produced more than 2,000 pages of suspicious activity reports, SARS. The National Archives and Records Administration has produced more than 62,000 pages of Vice President Biden's records on top of more than 20,000 pages it already made publicly available. And the Federal Bureau of Investigation provided access to and multiple briefings regarding a Form FD 1023 tip sheet, which contains sensitive information about a confidential human source. We have offered when I say we, the Democratic administration that believes in transparency has offered every aspect of what we could present to tell the truth. The truth is not being told here as relates to holding Mr. Biden in contempt. The truth is not being told because the facts evidence there is no basis for doing so. And if I might conclude, there is no basis for any form of impeachment against President Biden. There are no high crimes and misdemeanor. There is no treason, and every aspect of the government has, without in any way bias, presented this to committees of oversight and the judiciary. It seems that every time our friends on the other side of the aisle get in trouble and have no legislation to deal with the insulin $30, the Affordable Care Act, environmental crisis that we may be in, helping with inflation, which we've done, they throw out impeachment, just as the frivolous call for the impeachment of General Austin. Can we do something that helps the American people? My amendment should be passed because there's no evidence, Mr. Chairman, to move forward at all. I yield back.
I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes himself to speak against the amendment. The amendment would delete a number of important sections of the report. Specifically, I want to reference the report about the Biden's interaction with this Ukrainian energy company, Burisma. both the ranking member and the gentlelady from Texas said there was no evidence. Let me give you some evidence. It's called the 1023 form that the confidential human source gave to the FBI that they recorded in this form. Remember the facts here. Hunter Biden is asked by the people, the head of Burisma, this Ukrainian energy company, to weigh in on their behalf to relieve the pressure that the prosecutor in Ukraine is applying to the company. They're doing that because they want to do a big IPO offering and expand their business. He's asked to weigh in. He immediately calls DC. Mr. Archer, when he testified, said he actually called, one time he said he called Vice President Biden. Here's what the confidential human source related in the 1023 form, again, that the FBI tried to keep from us, but we finally got. They meaning Burisma, hired Hunter Biden to, quote, protect us through his dad from all kinds of problems. Now, this is the confidential human source, by the way. One of these 90 different depositions and interviews we have done in this committee, Scott Brady, U.S. Attorney in Pittsburgh, said, U.S. Attorney in Pittsburgh, tasked by the Justice Department to evaluate information regarding Burisma, the Bidens, and Ukraine, said, we found this confidential human source to be credible. In fact, he said in that deposition, we looked at where he was and his schedule when these meetings took place and found that he was in those locations meeting with these people. So they checked him out and found him to be credible. And here's what the confidential human source further said in this document that the FBI recorded. Due to Shokin's investigation into Burisma, it would have substantial negative impact on Burisma's prospective IPO in the United States. It'd be problematic to raise capital, given in Shokin's investigation into Burisma. Again, Shokin is the guy Joe Biden fired. And how did he do it? He leveraged American tax dollars. He says, you're not getting the money unless you fire the guy. He did this 3 days after his son calls him at the request of Zolochevsky, the guy who's talking to the confidential human source who the FBI recorded in this form that the FBI didn't want to give us. And that's the section that the gentlelady from Texas wants removed from the report. Now, why would that be? Why would she want to remove that section? That seems to be the heart of the matter. Politician taking actions that benefit his family financially and using American tax dollars to accomplish that end. Again, not Jim Jordan saying it. We have Joe Biden saying it. He said it on tape. I told the government there, you want the money, fire the prosecutor. Now we know why he want him fired, because the confidential human source told us. Again, why we couldn't see this, why we had to push so hard to finally get this information, I don't know. But what I do know is the confidential human source understood that Zolochevsky had already paid the Bidens to, quote, deal with Shokin. His words, not mine. I would yield the balance of my time to the gentleman from North Carolina.
I think the chairman and my thoughts went to the exact same place. The gentlelady from Texas and offering the amendment. In fact, in the amendment, it says, furthermore, to the extent that the Judiciary Committee has been investigating the Department of Justice's handling of the Hunter Biden criminal matter, the evidence has shown that the department has handled this investigation apolitically in accordance with all relevant statutes, guidelines, and policies. She said she was embarrassed by this hearing, but she's not embarrassed by offering that language. That's remarkable on its own. But as to the 1023, they say there's no evidence. The CHS, who, as the chairman says, has been turned credible by the FBI and by the United States Attorney from Pittsburgh, he says that the CHS said that Zlochevsky said it cost $5 million to pay one Biden and $5 million to pay to another Biden. And that he was furthermore to suggest that was Hunter and Joe. Ladies and gentlemen, that's direct evidence of a bribe. Now, you'd say it's hearsay. In fact, it sounds like double hearsay at first, because you got the CHS. We don't know who that is, and he's not testifying in court. And then you got Zlochevsky being the declarant, the person who said it. But that'd be subject to a hearsay exception. He's a conspirator with the Bidens under the evidence that he's offering right there. And it would be admissible in a court of law if the CHS was testifying. So I'd yield to anybody on the Democrat side, on the minority, or anybody on the committee who can tell us, who is the CHS? I want to know who the CHS is. Who's the confidential human source? There's no evidence.
Will the
Let's
gentleman
look
yield?
and see if there's evidence.
The gentleman yield?
Yes.
You, Ms. Bishop, you've answered your own question.
Time, the time is expired. Maybe we can get, we're happy to continue this debate because we think it's so obvious. I appreciate the gentleman's point. I think it's the gentlelady from Pennsylvania, Ms. Dean, is recognized. And
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
gentlelady is recognized.
I rise in support of the amendment offered by Ms. Jackson Lee, and before my remarks, I'd like to yield to the ranking member.
I thank the gentlelady. I just want to point out, when the Republicans talk about the 1023 form, we should have a member, the fact of the matter is that the person who provided the 1023 said in the 1023 that he didn't know if it was true. So we cannot rely on anything in the 1023 because the person who provided it said he had no idea whether it was true or not. I thank the gentlelady. I yield back to her.
Gentleman yield? Or gentlelady yield?
It is my time.
Yes, I know. You don't want to yield. Okay, I'll be glad to answer that, though.
Thank you. As I said, I rise in support of the Jackson Lee amendment because it is all about the evidence. Let's think about the evidence. It has been 608 days since Chairman Jordan received his own congressional subpoena. He has yet to comply. A subpoena simply saying, come and tell us what you know about the events surrounding January 6th, the lead up to it, your conversations with the president during it and after it. Come forward, reveal anything you know. The chairman should never have needed a subpoena to do exactly that. That is his duty as a citizen, as a member of this Congress, as someone who was here at the time of the insurrection incited by a former president. And yet they're searching, they're struggling, they're wishing they could find some evidence here that would connect Hunter Biden to Joe Biden. There's no evidence. It's one thing to demand legitimate congressional inquiries be met by cooperation, of course. Mr. Biden has agreed to cooperate in a public setting right here. You could have him whenever you want, where his words could not be manipulated. It is another thing entirely to say there are rules for thee, but not for me. That's exactly what we have here. It's sad to say this is yet another pathetic political stunt designed to help Donald Trump. But maybe they watched yesterday what happened in the DC Circuit Court as the former president sought immunity, even in the case of killing a political opponent or ordering the killing of a political opponent. Think of the absurdity of where we are because of Donald Trump and those who follow him, like a lot of members on this committee. Instead of helping Americans who are hurting, for example, already this year, there have been more than 900 gun deaths in the United States. Every day we lose a jetliner worth of Americans to deadly drug poisoning and overdoses. We've got democracies to support, including our own. And yet the Republican majority can't pull itself together to do any of that. Second, in interview after interview, deposition after deposition, and the Biden impeachment inquiry has yet to turn up legitimate evidence of any wrongdoing of the president. Zero, nothing, and they have supplied thousands, tens of thousands of documents. At the same time, a report by the Oversight Committee has found evidence that Donald Trump violated the Constitution, the emoluments clause of the Constitution, at least 7.8 million times. A few findings from that report bear repeating. President Trump called the presidency, quote, the greatest infomercial in political history. Donald Trump certainly knew how to work that infomercial to his personal advantage. The report reveals in just 2 years of his 4 years as president, he took at least $7.8 million in unconstitutional payments from 20 foreign countries to just 4 of his hotels. We don't know about the hundreds of other entities. Did Donald Trump seek congressional approval for these funds, as the Constitution requires? Of course not. In fact, Mr. Trump attempted to conceal his enrichment. Worst of all, 7.8 million is likely a gross underestimate. We still have no idea the full extent of his wrongdoing and that of his close family members. We only have information regarding 2 years and only 4 hotel properties. Can we all agree that these findings are shocking, sickening, unconstitutional, in violation of the emoluments clause, which simply says, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, forbids the president to accept money or payments or gifts of any kind from foreign governments, monarchs, unless he obtains consent from Congress. None of that happened. And yet, oh, the outrage about Hunter Biden. Mr. Chairman and your entire committee, where is your investigative spirit? Selling influence? You've shown no interest in looking at what the former president did in selling his interests. It's in a desperate attempt to rehabilitate their leader. Republicans are trying to pin Donald Trump's misdeeds on President Biden. There's a word for that. Desperation. No, actually, it's projection. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So this markup, it's about Hunter Biden. It's not about President Trump. I keep hearing my colleagues on the left talk about President Trump and that no one is above the law, and I keep hearing this argument ad infinitum. I guess what they mean is that no one is above the law except for when it comes to President Biden's son, Hunter. And Hunter Biden should not be given special treatment. He defied congressional subpoena and should be treated like others who have done the same, plain and simple. See, Hunter should not be treated with kid gloves. This man is 50 years old, literally. He's a grown-ass man. Congressional Democrats held Steve Bannon and Peter Navarro in contempt of Congress for not complying with congressional subpoenas concerning an investigation to January 6th. Hunter had every right to appear and plead the Fifth, and he chose to defy the subpoena when he instead held a self-serving press conference right at the steps of this building. When Democrats issued subpoenas to Republicans during the House January 6th investigation, President Biden said, and I quote, "I hope that the committee goes after them and holds them accountable criminally," end quote. Okay, all right. Now let's do Hunter, and that's why we're here. Hunter Biden makes arguments of passion to excuse his behavior. His best defense is oftentimes to make the public feel sorry for him. That's right, we should feel badly for him because he personally enriched himself because of his last name. And again, the left wants us to treat him with kid gloves, and this man is 50 years old. Please, your daddy's saving you at this point. It ain't gonna work here anymore. He should not be given special treatment because he thinks he's an American prince. And I don't mean Purple Rain. A witness does not get to decide his preferred method of appearing before the committee. The committee that subpoenaed the witness does. That's how this place works. House committees are not in the business of letting witnesses dictate to us the type of depositions or hearings that they want to have. This is not a kangaroo court like President Trump is seeing in the New York trial. It's up to the committees to determine the best methods that will further their investigation. And rather that be through deposition, transcribed interview, or public hearing. This is our job to do that. And Hunter Biden does not get to dictate that to us. And with that, I yield back the rest of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The gentleman will yield.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. I just want to respond to the ranking member's statement about the confidential human source. He said something to the effect that confidential human source didn't know if the statements he received from the chief executive Burisma were accurate or not. But here's what he said in the document that the FBI recorded. The confidential human source did not perceive Pajarski or Zolochevsky's statements to be unusual, self-serving, or pretextual. In other words, he thought they were accurate. He didn't know for sure, but he thought they were. That's why he said that. That's why the FBI recorded it. And this FD 1023 form that, again, they tried to keep from the U.S. Attorney, Mr. Brady, who was supposed to be gathering this information, sending it to the appropriate U.S. attorneys to investigate. In fact, they try to keep it from him. The things that are said in here, I think, are so powerful. And frankly, this was supposed to be, David Weiss was supposed to use this when he was doing his investigation. But instead, David Weiss decides to let the tax years where Hunter Biden owed so much money, just let the statute of limitations lapse for those years when it dealt with the Burisma income. So I appreciate the gentleman yielding.
Gentleman from Texas, yield the balance of your time. I thank you very much. So to the chairman's point, this 1023 is the mother of all corroborating evidence. It tells from the other side what the circumstantial evidence already indicates about the payment of money for Hunter Biden on this board for which he did nothing. The Devin Archer thing about calling Washington, the fact that Joe Biden made the audible on the airplane flying about holding the money to force the firing of Shokin, the prosecutor that Zlochevsky and didn't want to get rid of, didn't want to see, he wanted him gone because he was worried about being protected. And the phrase that you just read, Mr. Chairman, is saying, the CHS is saying, I wasn't involved in this stuff, so I don't know. But he seemed credible when he was telling me he bribed Joe and Hunter Biden.
Yep.
All right, expired the time.
Gentleman, Texas yields back. The
Mr.
chair
Chairman?
now recognizes.
Mr. Chairman?
The gentleman from California is recognized on the amendment.
Happy to yield to the gentleman from Texas, Sheila Jackson Lee.
I thank the gentleman from California, and this is to emphasize to the multiple gentle persons across the aisle that my amendment, the Jackson Amendment, has much merit because it is based on the fact that you have no facts and you have no truth. Isn't it interesting that we would rely upon two nations, Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine previously under the dominance of Russia, despotic leadership until they broke free, seeking a level of democracy, pleading for them to be able to be a nation that welcomes the values of equality and justice and the management of laws so that there is fairness. But yet my friends are trying to dismiss my amendment, which is solely suggesting that you have no facts on what happens in countries like Russia. They constantly do confidential or covert recordings. They constantly do that. They have no basis in what the person is saying is true or not. No knowledge of the veracity of what is said, but they're going around recording everyone, called confidential human source. And so the confidential human source that is being relied upon by the Republicans met Zlochevsky in person on one occasion and has spoken to him only twice on the telephone. As such, the confidential human source is not able to provide any further opinion as to the veracity of Zlochevsky's aforementioned statements. Of course, my amendment should be voted on and accepted because President Biden has been proven over and over again he had nothing to do with Burisma, nothing. So to respond to all of those who are trying to cite a confidential human source, it is of no value. It is like pouring a water into a pot full of holes. When you get through, you have nothing. We don't have anything. And so I would ask my colleagues to support the Jackson Lee Amendment, which indicates that with all of the thousands of pages from the Treasury Department, from the FBI, IRS, all these agencies, the White House willingness to be open and to present themselves forward, there is no reason to proceed as we are proceeding. Ask my colleagues to support the Jackson Lee Amendment.
Gentleman yields.
I yield back to the gentleman.
Gentleman from California yields back. Gentleman from Arizona is recognized, Mr. Biggs.
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So having attended the deposition of Devin Archer, and there were only 3 members of Congress in that deposition. The chairman, Mr. Jordan, myself, Mr. Goldman from the Democrat side. And what I find interesting is that this amendment is moving to strike all of this very important information which demonstrates a criminal conspiracy on the part of the president. So I asked questions. Mr. Jordan did, Mr. Goldman did. And of course, who was the brand that Devin Archer, Hunter Biden, and his Rob Walker, that partnership, what was the brand they were selling? It was Joe Biden. He admitted it. Well, could it be anybody else in the Biden family? No, we were selling Joe Biden. We were. That's what we were doing. So you begin talking, there's money that goes on. You see Joe Biden is involved in the business. He's making phone calls. He's making appearances. Money is coming in and exchanging hands. Shortly after phone calls, shortly after Joe Biden goes to a restaurant to meet with the wife of the former mayor of Moscow, one of the biggest oligarchs in Russia, $3.5 million right into the Biden coffers. They're receiving literally millions of dollars, all linked to this. So we say, well, my friends across the aisle say, well, there's no evidence here. There's nothing here to be seen. But Devin Archer was testifying to that. There are other witnesses that I don't think you've paid attention to who've also said Joe Biden was the brand. He was the product they were selling. Yeah, so you got that on one side. So the question is, can that be corroborated? Then you get a 1023. By the way, the FBI should give us the underlying 1023, which explains why they went ahead with this 1023. Now the chairman, yeah, there was another 1023, which
Nobody's told me that. Yeah.
Yes, there was. And it's why they went ahead with this interview. So great minds think alike, I guess. I actually underlined the same provisions that the chairman did. The former president or prime minister of Poland and Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, Wojcicki said Burisma hired the former president or prime minister of Poland. So you get the prime minister of Poland's hired to leverage what? The EU folks. But what was Hunter hired for? To, quote, protect us through his dad from all kinds of problems, close quote. Now, I won't go through the rest of this, but because it also corroborates what Devin Archer was talking about. Hunter Biden's dad was the product. And what was he expected to do? He was expected to do things like was explained in here by a reliable source, to take care of Victor Shulkin. So what else did Devin Archer talk about? He's in Dubai with Hunter Biden. They're at that sailboat typey hotel. They're there, and they're with the president and CEO of Burisma, as well as the treasurer of Burisma. And what are they talking about? Oh my gosh, we're having trouble getting our IPO out because Victor Shulkin, the AG in Ukraine, is basically going after them. Devin Archer says they excused themselves, and Hunter goes and calls his dad because that's what the CEO of Burisma said, please do. We need help from your dad. We have a recess. They come back. Well, maybe it was just to DC. What confirms that? The 1023. Don't say there's no corroborating evidence implicating Joe Biden. It's all in this 1023 and Devin Archer's testimony. And then you start using all the other documentation to show very clearly a criminal conspiracy of bribery and selling access on the part of the Biden family. I'll yield to the gentleman from North Carolina.
I thank the gentleman from Arizona. And I'm struck, and maybe I'm going to get a chance in a minute, but the continued contention that there's no evidence because the CHS doesn't know whether what Zlochevsky and Prigozhin said was true or not, even though they seemed credible. That's not how this works. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. I'll explain it in a minute, but we got my truth, your truth. We really don't have differing definitions of evidence. It means something, and we'll talk about that.
The gentleman's time has expired from Arizona. The gentleman from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes on the amendment, and then we'll have the vote on the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So let's talk about that just a little bit more. Evidence, this is not, actually everybody thinks this can sound lawyerly, but it's just very straightforward. Evidence is anything that comes within the rules of admissibility that tends to make any matter, any proposition more probable or less probable, meaning that it has probative force, tends to prove one way or the other. And they have all these rules in evidence about when somebody who's not in court and says something that was said out of court wants to testify about that, when that can be allowed. And here we have what's called, it looks like preliminarily a double hearsay problem. The CHS is not here testifying. Not, or, and
Just a programming note, I'm
Prigozhin
gonna get
and
through the vote,
and
and then
Zlochevsky,
that
the
should be
guys who
just
say
about
they paid
time
a
to
bribe,
go
certainly aren't here.
to the normal scheduled program
But
at
what
8:30,
this is a
and
situation.
then
Let me
we will
give
pick
you
up
a
the final
hypothetical,
4
slightly
hours
different situation. Let's assume it's
sometime
not the
in the
confidential
afternoon
human source, or the
tomorrow.
confidential human source isn't having a conversation with Prigozhin and Zlochevsky, but he's somewhere nearby, and he hears them talking. He eavesdrops on them, and they're talking about having paid bribes to Hunter Biden and Joe Biden, $5 million each. Now, in that case, situation also, the person in the position of the CHS, the eavesdropper, would not know whether Zlochevsky and Prigozhin are being truthful or not in saying they paid bribes, but that does not mean it is not evidence. It is evidence. And it comes in through the hearsay rules because those people are describing a criminal conspiracy. The statements of a co-conspirator are so-called admissions of a party opponent. They come in through that rule. This is straight up direct evidence of bribery. Now, you can say, if you want to, that you're not persuaded by the direct evidence, the person admitting that they committed a bribe or undertook a bribery scheme, but it's not that it's not evidence. So you could say, well, I think there's evidence, and it's admissible evidence, and a jury would be well-founded deciding on the basis of that evidence to convict for bribery, but I'm not going to do an investigation anyway. I'm not going to support bringing in the witness who is defying the subpoena of the Congress because I'm just not persuaded by that direct evidence of bribery. I understand that would be a contention you can make. But again, even in this age, when you talk about, I want you to tell your truth and I'm going to tell my truth, which is abysmal and absurd on its face, I didn't know that we had started changing the definition of evidence. But there is evidence. And even to those people who say, well, it sounds like it's circumstantial evidence and indirect evidence. Well, by the way, lots of people were convicted on circumstantial and indirect evidence, but that's not the case either here. When the bribery conspirator is overheard or is heard saying, I engaged in a bribe with that person, that's direct evidence of bribery. And so, and I'm, in terms of credibility, again, I'd love to evaluate the confidential human source. I think the country ought to get the chance to evaluate the confidential human source in this case. It's that important. But if you want to say, and again, what's in the FBI and the United States Attorney have both evaluated him, they tell us, and they say this confidential human source is credible. So if he were in the situation of being an eavesdropper, that means he really did what he says he really heard what he says he heard. So some people won't be satisfied no matter what evidence is offered, and that's clear. But there's lots of evidence. And with that, I'd like to yield to the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
I thank the gentleman from North Carolina. I wanted to reference a remark made by my colleague, the gentlelady from Ms. Dean. She says she's worried about guns, and we need more gun legislation. I'm worried about guns too, but we don't need more gun legislation on legal gun owners. But we do need to address issues like Hunter Biden, and we need to prosecute people like that who criminally falsify an application for a gun. These aren't talking points, this is the truth. Who criminally was drunk and high while purchasing said weapons, who criminally and illegally disposed of guns and was to be exonerated in a special plea deal. Talk about justice not being fair for everyone. God help anybody who did that who wasn't the president's son. That's what I worry about, and that's what Americans worry about. I yield back.
Gentlemen, time has expired. The question occurs on the amendment from the gentlelady from Texas. All those in favor say aye. All those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chairs, the noes have it. A roll call being requested. The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Jordan?
No.
Mr. Jordan votes no. Mr. Issa? Mr. Issa votes no. Mr. Buck? Mr. Gates? Mr. Biggs? Mr. Biggs votes no. Mr. McClintock? Mr. Tiffany? Mr. Tiffany votes no. Mr. Massey. Mr. Roy. Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop votes no. Ms. Sparks. Ms. Sparks votes no. Mr. Fitzgerald. Mr. Benz. Mr. Benz votes no. Mr. Klein. Mr. Armstrong. Mr. Armstrong votes no. Mr. Gooden. Mr. Gooden votes no. Mr. Van Drew. Mr. Van Drew votes no. Mr. Nels. Mr. Moore. Mr. Kiley. Mr. Kiley votes no. Ms. Hageman. Ms. Hageman votes no. Mr. Moran. Ms. Lee. Mr. Hunt. Mr. Fry. Mr. Fry votes no. Mr. Nadler.
Aye.
Mr. Nadler votes aye. Ms. Lofgren. Ms. Lofgren votes aye. Ms. Jackson Lee. Ms. Jackson Lee votes aye. Mr. Cohen. Mr. Johnson. Mr. Schiff. Mr. Schiff votes aye. Mr. Swalwell. Mr. Liu. Ms. Jayapal. Ms. Jayapal votes aye. Mr. Correa. Ms. Scanlon. Mr. Nagoose. Ms. McBath. Ms. Dean. Ms. Dean votes aye. Ms. Escobar. Ms. Ross. Ms. Ross votes aye. Ms. Bush. Mr. Ivy. Ms. Ballant. Ms. Ballant votes aye.
McClintock, no.
Mr. McClintock votes no. Mr. Gates votes no.
Does anyone else wish to record their vote? Clerk will report.
Mr. Chairman, there are 8 ayes and 15 noes.
The amendment is not agreed to.
All right. So that is the first half of it. Like I said, there's 5.5, 6 hours left of it. So we'll have to break it up so everybody doesn't lose their mind, me included. If you're on YouTube, you will get sent over, or should, absolutely should, to the new one. If you are not on YouTube, well, I guess it's for everybody. Rumble takes about 3 to 5 minutes to set up with the new RTMP. So as soon as I get going over there, the stream will be back up. So I hope to see you all over there. And I'll see you soon.